It always disappointed me that this game didn't use Rimsky-Korsakov as the title screen music. Scheherazade, Arabian Dream, or The Magic of Scheherazade in the West, is a bit of an odd game. It feels like they just threw everything together for this one. Action-adventure? Check. Turn-based battles? Check. A character class system? I think this is actually the first time that we've seen that on the Famicom. Time travel? Sure, why not? You know that hoary old game mechanic where people like having you plant trees and then time travel so that you can see the tree grow? Yeah, they've got that in here too. It actually makes Scheherazade Arabian Dream a bit of a mess. None of the systems wind up working that well, but it's amazing that they pack them all in. The story of the game is that an evil wizard has released an evil djinn, and together the two of them kidnapped Princess Scheherazade, who presumably is not the storyteller Scheherazade. You're a descendant of a good wizard who sets out to defeat them, and finds himself lost in time and space. On the other hand, you do pick up a friendly cat person immediately. Your first task, once you've selected a name, is to choose what class you want to be. Warrior, Cleric, or Mage. Knowing that I wouldn't make a whole lot of progress, I went with the Warrior. Magic does get a little bit better further in the game, but you're probably going to want the sword strength immediately. You can freely change your class, just go to one of the mosques you'll find in certain towns. Then we're into the game, and if you're familiar with the magic of Scheherazade, you're going to notice some things are different. A lot of the graphics have been redrawn, and more importantly, the game world was greatly simplified in the international versions. If you explore the towns, you'll find buildings with an H on them. Those are the hotels where you can recover health. Buildings with an S on them are shops. At the shops you'll want to pick up some bread. It automatically restores your health when you reach 0. One weird feature of the shops is that you can haggle. If you're successful, the shopkeeper cuts their price in half, and if you're not, they just take some money from you anyways. As you set out on your quest, you first have to set up what your commands are. To do that, you hit Start, and then you press left and right to set an action for the B button, and up and down to set an action for the A button. If no action is set, the button makes you jump. The B button is going to be your attack or talk commands, and the A button will be used for magic. You explore the world one screen at a time, Zelda style, and when you enter a screen, you might be attacked. If you're attacked or not is totally random, and you could even get rid of the attack just by reversing direction and going back in. The action in Scheherazade is kind of rough. The hitboxes for everything are loose suggestions. You'll get hit by things that you're nowhere near, and you won't hit people that it looks like you should hurt. One trick to be aware of in combat, you can deflect shots back at people. Not that the shots hurt anybody that they fly at, but at least you can knock them away. You'll need to grind up cash a lot more than experience. While you get experience for every kill, you can't level up unless you rescue the princess of the chapter, and that can take quite a while to get to. There's 5 chapters total in Scheherazade, and that makes the game pretty lengthy. Sometimes instead of getting into an action scene for combat, the game just jumps into a turn-based combat system. The first thing you have to do on that one is select which allies you want to bring into battle. One of the big features of Scheherazade is the enormous cast of characters that can join your party. There's 11 unique characters in the game, each of whom do something special in combat. And if you bring the right combination of characters, they do something extra. The only one I got was the cat person who joins you at the start of the game. I did not make much progress trying to follow guides. In fact, one video walkthrough I was watching did this. That's a sequence break that jumps you way ahead in the plot, and they used it to grind up money for an hour. So I had a bit of trouble. At the start of the game, you're pretty underpowered for the turn-based combat, but you can buy some assistance. Mercenaries are available in packs of 4. Hire them, and you can throw them up as a wall of bodies in combat. As you're exploring, you might encounter an eclipse, The skies darken, the enemies become tougher, and certain special events become available. I couldn't show it off here, but the last time I played, I used an eclipse to get infinite money. There was a spell to get a lot of money that you could only cast during an eclipse, and I could keep going back and reacquiring the spell before the eclipse ended. There's a few varieties of spells. You could cast a magic bolt, or this spell reveals hidden entrances. You'll need to use that to find the door that lets you go back in time. In the past, you'll encounter special events like this boss, and you'll have to locate the dungeon to continue. And that's where I left off. You get 3 lives in Scheherazade for some reason, but also infinite continues. Lives will let you continue roughly at the same screen, but continues set you back to the town that was the start of the chapter. There is a lot going on in Scheherazade, but none of it is really done well. The action is in a rough state, that turn-based combat feels like an afterthought, exploration consists of way too many identical screens. They tell you when there's a secret door on a screen, so there's not much point in requiring magic to open it. I didn't even get into oddities like the magical college, or how the Japanese version's about 4 times as large as the US version. If you do want to play it, I recommend the US version. I think it's easier and it looks nicer. The best thing I can say about Arabian Dream Scheherazade is that it's ambitious. They really went for making a big game in this one. Unfortunately, that final result just didn't live up to that ambition. Shin Onigashima was a bit of a problem for this project. The issue is, this is not a single release. Instead, the game was released in 2 halves, the second half following about a month after the first. So is that 2 episodes, or 1? Well, since the second episode would be just, this is the same game, I decided to combine all of the 2-disc releases into single episodes. Many of the games are divided up as Zenpen, or first volume, and Kohen, second volume. But others just use Part 1 and Part 2. There are 6 of these 2-part releases, and they've proven to be a bit confusing for people who collect disc system games. I recall seeing one person online who was very proud to purchase their first disc system game, a copy of the Kohen for Shin Onigashima, and I had to break it to them that they purchased the second half of a game that wouldn't even start. You can literally translate the title Shin Onigashima to New Ogre Island, but that really doesn't convey the concept here. Onigashima is the location of the climax for the fairy tale Momotaro, or the Peach Boy. Momotaro gets his own RPGs, action games, and board games from Hudson, but it's a folktale, so anyone could release a game based on the character. And in the case of Shin Onigashima, Nintendo smashed together a whole bunch of fairy tales. For ones that play major roles in the story, you've got Kaguya Hime and Kintaro. If you're familiar with Japanese legends at all, you'll be playing this game and going, I understood that reference. Shin Onigashima is divided up into chapters. There's 4 chapters on the first disc, and 5 chapters on the second disc, though that last chapter is an extremely short epilogue. Unusually for these menu-driven adventures at the time, the text in Shin Onigashima is presented in a vertical format, so it's all read top to bottom, right to left. The menu of commands that you choose from appears at the bottom of the screen, and you have the usual look, take, talk, use. In the first chapter, you're playing as an old man and woman who don't have any children of their own. But as they progress the story, they first find a kid in a pot in the river, and then another kid in a golden bamboo stalk, and their children become the protagonists for the rest of the game.
Once you're playing as the kids, you can freely switch between them with a new menu command. After the kids do a bit of adventuring in the wilderness, they return home to find that demons have taken their adoptive parents. And that sets off the quest for the rest of the game. Something significant about Shin Onigashima is just how much of it there is. While I was recording, I got to the end of Chapter 3. And of course, I was following a walkthrough to make sure I saw as much of the game as possible. In that time, there were dozens of locations, piles of different characters, and lots of things to poke at or do. A lot of adventure games at this point are still very contained. There might be a dozen locations across the entire game. Shin Onigashima is big, and it feels like there's an entire epic story happening here. When you complete a chapter, it automatically saves your progress, and that throws you back to the main menu. From the main menu, you have the options to start a new game, continue on that first disc, and if you've completed all of the game on the first disc, then you have the option to start the second disc. If you hit start while you play, then you have the opportunity to save your progress right there, but that also takes you back to the main menu. Shin Onigashima is a beloved classic in Japan. It's right up there with the original Zelda when people talk about the best games on the disc system. And beyond that, it's in the running for the best 8-bit adventure game. As such, Nintendo revisits this one often. It was remade as one of the very last releases for the Super Famicom, and it came on 2 separate cartridges. And the girl from Shin Onigashima plays a major part in Captain Rainbow. As for my take, yeah, if you're going to play any adventure game on the Famicom or the Famicom Disk System, this is the one to play. It's very puzzle-driven instead of event-driven, and most of the puzzles involve knowing the stories and figuring out how to apply them in that situation. There isn't a lot of pick the same command over and over again until something different happens. It also has a very charming tone. For obvious reasons, these kinds of folk tales are popular choices for Japanese text when you're learning the language, and that carries over to the game's script. It's surprisingly accessible. All in all, this is one of the best Nintendo games from the 80s that's effectively unknown outside of Japan. Zoids Chuotairi no Tatakai might be one of the weirdest games I've played. There's a lot of, why would you do it that way, in this game? First of all, Zoids is a toy line of robotic war machines piloted by humans. The backstory changes in literally every single iteration of it. In the US, they were called Starriers, and the story was that they were intelligent robots whose brains happened to be human-shaped. So what kind of game do you make out of that? Maybe some action platformer? A shoot-'em-up? How about a Dragon Quest knockoff? Once you enter your name, you start out in the throne room of the King of the Republic. No, I did not misspeak. You're the 20-meter tall mechanical Tyrannosaurus Rex. So naturally you walk up to the princess and king and talk to them. And then you can head downstairs and meet your wife. She's the red mechanical Tyrannosaurus Rex. She asks you to give up war, and if you agree, it's an instant game over. The story of the game is that the Republic is being attacked by the evil Empire, and you're tasked with freeing all of the Republic's cities from Empire rule. Now this might look like Dragon Quest, but there are no shops, no money, and no experience. At least not experience in a regular form. What you can do is find parts for a super robot, or armor pieces you can attach to yourself to increase your abilities. As you free cities, you can also be promoted by the king to a new rank, and that lets you recruit additional Zoids. In fact, a small upgrade is available in the first town. If you search this spot in the park, and then talk to the Zoid inside, you'll get an item. Okay, now it's time to leave this first town and explore the world. As you walk around, you'll see these red Zoids.
Those are the Empire's soldiers, and colliding with them starts a fight. Now you might think that means that you could just avoid all random battles, but there's a bit of a problem. The game has a tendency to spawn enemies directly on top of you. And I mean directly. Okay, we've gotten into a fight. We can see the enemy forces. You can select the data option to see what you have, or choose one of your allies to send into battle if you have any. You can also choose to use an inventory item. Mainly that would be a pod that can heal you. Or you could run away or fight. Running away is an interesting option since if an enemy spawned on top of you, you can't move, and so a few seconds later you're right back into the fight. In fact, Zoids moving on top of you and locking up the game until it decides to move again is a problem that this game has everywhere. Okay, so now we're in combat. The vertical bars in the lower left are your health meter. You start out being able to take maybe 4 hits. Maybe. But your defense score can increase, and so can your life bar as you find parts. The radar shows where enemies are around you. All you have to do is blow everybody up. Rotate left and right, and hit B to shoot. It typically only takes 1 or 2 hits to defeat an enemy, but hitting them is pretty tough. I'd recommend just firing at a steady pace, then letting them wander in on top of your shots. Their shots will hit you if they close in and they're kind of still toward the middle of the screen. It's actually a pretty big area where the shots will damage you. I have successfully intercepted shots, shooting down the enemy bullets, but that doesn't seem to work particularly often. The way that the enemies shoot at you, you pretty much have to eat a couple of bullets. You're just not maneuverable enough to dodge anything, and getting people to the center of the screen can take a while. If the T-Rex is taken out, it's game over right there. That's why it's helpful to have allies that you can send into battle for you. If you head west from your starting point, you'll come across this little town, and inside the town, there's some people you can recruit. They look exactly the same as everyone else. But talking to this pterodactyl and this stegosaurus adds them to your party. Even with assistance, Zoids is a hard game. You just have to soak up too many hits, and if you just get unlucky with enemy spawns, then you're dead. I actually made it a goal to try to get back to the first castle so that I could get a password and heal. I never succeeded at it. Enemies spawned on top of me non-stop while I was walking through that narrow pass, and I never could get back to the castle. A password's the only way that you can continue as well. Healing, on the other hand, is available on all maps. You just have to talk to the right person. No, the game won't tell you who the right person is in advance. From there, the game's pretty open-ended. Go off and explore, try to free some cities. I have one special gameplay tip for this one. If you enter your name as Tana, then you start out with everything. Doing that means you'll survive more than 10 steps. Even in Japan, Zoids is remembered as an extremely difficult game. It's also remembered for its terrible writing. A lot of what the Zoids in town talk about is just nonsense. I was glad it wasn't just my shoddy Japanese skills that were the problem here. Somehow, Zoids actually got 2 sequels. The first one is pretty similar to this game, although perhaps not quite as crazy. The second is more of a strategic game. We won't be seeing those for a while, though. As for this one, yeah, it's a pretty bad game, but it's also just bonkers. It's a game you have to see to believe. And then once you've seen it, you're okay with putting it away forever and never looking at it again. This one was a disappointment for me. Not because the game's bad, but because I just don't have enough time to dedicate to it. Megami Tensei is the best RPG the Famicom has seen so far. In fact, I will go as far to say it's the best RPG the Famicom has through at least 1988, and possibly into the 90s. It's a game where I wouldn't mind sitting down and playing it for a few days. But my format means I've got to keep making videos, so I just have to keep going on. Digital Devil Monogatari Megami Tensei is the first in the very expansive Megami Tensei series. There's literally dozens of games and spin-off series that have spun off of spin-off series. It actually originated with a series of novels, and this game is a sequel to those. The story is that brilliant student Nakajima invents a computer that can summon demons. These aren't necessarily demons in the Judeo-Christian mold. They're any and all mythological beings. After 2 adventures where he and his friends had to stop things that he unleashed from destroying the world, Nakajima still hasn't learned his lesson, and this time he's got to deal with Lucifer. Lucifer's making his own computer to get access to the human world. So Nakajima and his friend Yumiko go to Lucifer's pyramid to defeat him. This is the first RPG we've seen on the Famicom that fits into the wizardry mold. Wizardry being one of the 2 big computer RPG franchises of the 80s. It featured 3D dungeon crawls as an environment, and monster battles that were menu-based and featured portraits of the creatures you encountered. Other RPGs we've seen have borrowed wizardry's combat, but not its first-person dungeon crawl. Megami Tensei goes even further than that. It uses some of wizardry's interface elements too, like having the party's status always displayed below the action. And I've got to say, Megami Tensei is a better wizardry than wizardry. We'll actually see the Famicom port of wizardry in a couple of months, but it's not as smooth or as well structured as Megami Tensei is. This was a game that was both learning from more recent RPG designs, and was skillfully implementing them on a limited system. The resulting game is technically impressive. The big portraits, the snappy movement, the thoughtful dungeon layout. As someone who came to this game a bit backwards, having played the Shin Megami Tensei reboot of it, it impresses me how well implemented everything is. A perfect example, the very first spell you get is Map. For just 2 of your magic points, you get to see the entire layout of the level. And since you don't have anything else to do with your magic points right then, why not use it to help you get your bearings? Another great thing, when you start the game, you design the characters. There are 5 stat points, they all start at 5, and you get 15 points to distribute among them. Now there is a trap option here. The 5 stats are Strength, Intelligence, Constitution, Speed, and Luck. Intelligence is only used for spells, and Nakajima never gets spells. Yumiko will be your consistent magic user, so she does need more intelligence, but she needs a wider distribution of stats than Nakajima does. She'll be hitting people from time to time, too. So you've entered the pyramid. The first thing you need is equipment. It is an RPG after all. The top floor of the pyramid is a small town. As you explore the town, you'll find a chest. That'll give you your starting money, and then you'll have to go to this shop to buy weapons and armor. Buy the armor first. You get a little bit of cash back from your clothes, and if you don't get that cash back, you can't afford to fully equip everyone. I'd get both of them combat suits, Nakajima a set of nunchucks, and Yumiko a jackknife. Another point of interest in the town is this shop. This will be your primary source of healing until you get magic that can take care of that. One more thing in town is this monk. He gives you your password. There's no battery save in Megami Tensei. Now let's go past this guard and find a way down. The pits aren't actually pits. They'll give you the choice of going up or down them. The real dungeon starts on the 2nd floor down. You'll want to explore around a bit, grind up both types of currencies you'll need, and get some experience. A useful thing to know is that passing through doorways is what triggers an encounter check. So when you go through an arch, that's when you might encounter something. Alright, we've got a monster. At the beginning of every combat round, you get the choice to fight, run away, or use your computer. And using the computer is where things get interesting. You could summon, but that requires that you have a monster ally. And to get those, you have to use the second option. You have to talk to who you're fighting. All of the monsters have distinctive personalities and conversations that they can have with you. Some of them won't talk unless you isolate them or weaken them first. Some want to know your opinions on things. Others want to be bribed. Some might join you just for the fun of it. Once you have a monster ally, you can summon it at the cost of Maka, a particular currency that only demons use. You can have up to 3 party members out with you at once. Now here's the thing. The early stages of Megami Tensei are hard. You'll want to recruit monsters early on, but it's tough to do. It's also tough to get enough money to keep your team healthy, and anything going wrong is probably going to be a game over. On my 4th attempt, I managed to level up once. Now this does get easier. A team will make sure that your human characters aren't constantly getting pounded, and a lot of the demons are really only good as cannon fodder. When you start finding your demons to be ineffective, there's another trick you can do. Visit this shop in town, and you can fuse demons together to make new ones. This is the way you keep your team rolling, even though you can't make demons that are higher level than you. I don't have much more to say about Megami Tensei since I couldn't make a whole lot of progress. It's a game that's been remade a few times. I played it as Kyoyaku Megami Tensei on the Super Famicom, and that version has some quality of life improvements. And as for sequels, well, it's a big series. There's only one more Famicom game, though. So I think my enthusiasm for Megami Tensei is pretty obvious at this point. This is the first time where I felt that an RPG on the Famicom was bringing something new to the genre. It's also a good-looking game, and I even love the music. Megami Tensei is an impressive game, and I can see how it launched a franchise. Now this is a strange one. Let me start at the high level. In the mid-80s, SWAT was a brand new concept. It was a group set up by the LAPD to deal with extreme situations. A better equipped, more militarized version of the police. It rapidly spread from LA, and it also quickly stopped being used for things like hostage crises, and wound up getting used for things like storming the wrong address in the middle of the night because someone was suspected to be growing a pot plant. As for this game, the title screen indicates that the copyright is owned by Oki Hajime. He was a minor comics artist, but I can't find any trace of SWAT being a comic. My best guess is that it was a concept Hajime was shopping around. Toei picked it up to use as a video game, but nothing else materialized from the project. The box and ads have the only Hajime SWAT art I can find. And then there's the game. It's one of the strangest mashups I've encountered, and in Japan it's only remembered for being unplayably broken. The story is that a terrorist group have seized a building and taken dozens of hostages. As the captain of the 5-man SWAT team, you have to clear the building floor by floor, eliminating all of the terrorists and rescuing all of the hostages. And you have a 24-hour time limit to do it in. After you hit start and enter a name, your first task is to decide how you're going to breach the building. Storm the front door, breach the emergency exit, or slip in the tradesman's entrance. There's no guards on that last option, so that's the one you want to use. Once in the building, it's a first-person maze. You can search the hallways, eliminating terrorists one by one. There's also an adventure game-style menu that you'll use. From top to bottom, the options are Look Around, which you use to spot terrorists that are in cover, Examine, which you use when you come across something peculiar, Listen, which you use to detect nearby terrorists and hostages, the confusing Remove, which does not remove your equipment, it removes traps and other equipment that you come across. Open is actually a little bit tricky. When you select that, you're given 3 options of how you want to breach a room. You can rush in, you can throw a smoke grenade, which lets you close in with the terrorists, but it can also affect elderly hostages, or you can throw in a hand grenade, which is its own set of problems. Continuing down the menu, there's Use, where you pull out a tool. That's used for applying first aid, or radioing in when you think you've cleared all the terrorists on a floor. Arms, which lets you choose how everyone is going to be equipped. Form is for formation, and it brings up a chart where you can determine where everyone stands in the group. If you know you're about to storm a room full of terrorists, then you might place everybody forward. But usually when you're in uncertain territory, you want everyone at the cardinal points so that there's someone watching in all directions. Finally, Para stands for Parameter, and that's how you check the status of all of your team members. All that said, the bulk of what you're going to be doing in the game is combat. And the combat system is slow, clunky, unintuitive, and all around not fun. You have to give commands to all 5 members of your squad in turn. So let's walk through a basic one. You want to attack the bad guy. Step 1, select attack. Step 2, decide how you're going to attack. Close range, long range, or use your special ability. Let's say you want to get close. Okay, now you have to decide if you're going to rush them, or you're going to sneak up on them. Sneaking is only useful if the terrorist's back is turned to you. That chosen, are you going to stab them, or are you going to garrote them? Now, do you want to do that to their body, their head, or their legs? Finally, you have to confirm that everything you entered was correct. Or do you want to try to re-enter things? There's no way to go back if you hit the wrong thing. You have to progress to the end of the menu and then say you want to redo it. And that is the command for one character. Now do that 4 more times. When combat begins, you can see how many terrorists you're dealing with, and you're told at what range they are. Then you go into the menu where you can start selecting commands. The first command is attack, and I've already walked you through that. The second command is covering fire. Anyone who shoots and misses is vulnerable to a counterattack, and you can use covering fire to prevent that. Going through that, you have to choose what weapon you want to use, and then where you're aiming at the person. Before I go on, I need to mention, the weapon abbreviations don't make a whole lot of sense. You'll probably understand SMG right off the top of your head, but HG is handgun, not hand grenade. Hand grenades are HB, and if you throw one at enemies who are too close to you, you wind up hurting the squad. The third option is to defend yourself. Straight from the manual, the only reason to ever use this is if someone's too wounded to fight. Then if you press B, you go to a second page of that top menu. There you can select to use something. Again, this will mostly be first aid kits. You can get the status of the character, because why would you want that on the screen while you're choosing actions? The final option is to automatically run the fight for you. Again, that's an option you'll probably never want to select. When you hit terrorists, eventually they'll fall down. If you hit them again while they're down, they'll likely be killed. But if they're still down at the end of the round, then you'll have an opportunity to interrogate them after the fight. In those instances, you go to this menu. Talking is only for hostages. For terrorists, you have to choose to interrogate them. And then you're given the option to beat them to make them talk, or you could just hear them out. When you think you've gotten all of the terrorists on the floor, you can radio in and get permission to go on to the next floor. The radio is also how you get your password, and that's where the problem is. You see, passwords you get on the first floor are fine. Passwords you get on the second floor and further up, those get to be a little bit trickier.
the game will randomly exclude characters from those passwords. And if that happens, obviously your password won't work. That bug is the only thing that SWAT is remembered for. SWAT is a game that demonstrates how complexity doesn't guarantee quality. I can't think of another Famicom game that has as complicated combat mechanics, unless we're counting something like Koei's strategy games. What we find in SWAT is that even though it is complex, none of it's interesting. The choices aren't really meaningful. There isn't a really clear connection between your actions and what happens. And it's terrible at providing you with information that you need to know, like the status of your squad. It feels like Shoei Systems tossed every idea they thought was cool into the game without building a solid foundation for the game to begin with. And the result is something that's way more likely to irritate you than entertain you. We have reached the end of an era. This is the last IREM game to have an LED light embedded in it. It was a cool feature, but I guess they decided to save a little bit of money on cart manufacturing. It's the end of an era in another way, too. This is the last Spelunker game for 20 years. After one enormously successful game, and then this sequel that IREM produced themselves, there isn't another one until Spelunker HD in 2009. And that was kind of the start of a Spelunker renaissance. So is this game bad enough that it should kill a franchise? No, not really. No, not really. It's not great, but it was a perfectly reasonable action-adventure game, at least until I reached one part. The story of this game is that the gates to Fairyland have been closed, allowing the dark god Gira to influence the world. You found the clues to open the gates of Fairyland again, so off you go to do that. And the first thing you'll notice when you start a game is that you have to select a character. You have three choices: the Explorer, which is the main character from the original game, an Esper, or a Sage. I wound up playing with the Explorer for most of this, considering I felt like he was the default. But he's actually the worst character. He has the longest health bar, but he lacks special abilities. His biggest advantage is that his ranged attack is a gun, which uses bullets. The ranged attacks for the other two use up their life bar. The Explorer also gets to take additional bombs and food with him. The bombs are similar to the ones in the original Spelunker. Drop them down and back off. The food can fully refill your life, but it's also used to solve a couple puzzles. The big problem for the Explorer is that he has the smallest virtue bar. You get virtue for killing monsters, and lose a virtue for killing natural animals. Those animals can still be a threat to you, or you might want to kill them to get a life recovery item. The other way you lose virtue is by falling in a hole, where you go to hell and you're sent back by Enma at the cost of some of your virtue. If you run out of virtue, it is game over. The Esper's thing is that he's more maneuverable. His ranged attack is a lightning bolt, which does additional damage, and he has a special ability that allows him to mark a location and then teleport back to it. There's a huge amount of backtracking in Spelunker 2, so being able to jump back to a previous location is pretty useful. The big thing about the Sage is that his bullets freeze enemies in place. Even if it costs some health, it is amazingly useful. On top of that, he has a special ability called Aura. It's only used in boss rooms, but it does extra high damage to bosses at the cost of a lot of health. Now we can actually start playing, and the game is an action-adventure platformer with some real heavy exploration emphasis. You'll find the path branching off up and down from your regular path. What you're looking for as you explore is a crystal ball. Those are held by the bosses, and they open up the gate at the end of all 3 stages. And the stages are sprawling. They're large enough that I found even the first stage to be a bit disorientating. As you explore, you'll find a few useful items. The cross is the only thing that can harm undead monsters, and the red bombs freeze enemies in place. You can switch what you're using by pressing select, and that brings up a sub-menu that you use with left and right. When you find silver keys, those are used to open horizontal doors that block your path, and the gold keys are used to open background doors and open up paths that you can go up through. While you're walking around, you'll generally want to stick to your close-range weapon. It actually has a decent reach, so it's fine for most situations. When you're dealing with something a little bit faster, you'll probably want to switch to a ranged attack. That's also true when you're dealing with a more powerful enemy. You'll see a few things carry over from the original Spelunker as you explore, like these geysers of steam. You also take a bit of fall damage if you drop too far, though it's much more generous than it was in Spelunker 1. There's also these pits that open up underneath your feet. On the first stage, you'll encounter this volcano with stones falling from the sky. There's also this wounded deer that you can share some food with, and some tunnels that you have to swim through. The first boss doesn't seem too bad at first. You can freeze the tiger in place and just poke away at it. Then it pulls out the giant face and paws. It looks a bit scary, but the paws aren't that much of a threat. With that out of the way, you can go on to stage 2, and that's where I encountered my big problem. The stage starts out with you jumping between these moving platforms, and I had a bad tendency to jump straight through them. Do that a couple times and it's a game over, and then you find out that there's no continues. Spelunker 2 is a long game as well. On your first playthrough, you can honestly expect to spend a couple of hours on each stage. And with no continues and no passwords, it can get pretty frustrating, even if you don't jump right through platforms. In Japan, what Spelunker 2 is remembered for is not being anything like Spelunker 1. Sequels being radically different was not an unusual phenomenon at the time, but for some reason Spelunker 2 became the poster child for that. As for myself, I thought for a while I was going to have to talk about Spelunker 2 being just perfectly middle-of-the-road average. But bad platforming is always a deal-breaker. After that, I don't see myself going back and trying to make any further progress in Spelunker 2. Tsuppari Oozumou is probably the most beloved Famicom game to never get released outside of Japan. It was enormously popular in Japan, although all of its sequels were on other platforms. It's the first game to make sumo wrestling into an action game. And it does a decent job of it. Not perfect, since we're still in the early days for fighting games, but still very impressive for 1987. When you start the game, you need to name your wrestler. There are a lot of kanji to choose from in this case, too. There is a goal in Tsuppari Oozumou. You are competing in a series of sumo tournaments, and you have to win a majority of your matches in each of them to advance up the ranks. And if your record is especially good, you can skip up a few ranks, too. If you have a bad record, though, you can never be demoted. Also, for every 3 matches you win, you get a little bit stronger. There's 55 opponents that you'll face, each with unique stats and abilities, and during a tournament, you might find yourself up against somebody much stronger than you. In Tsuppari Oozumou, the A and B buttons are completely contextual. What they do depends on how close you are to your opponent, what stance you're in, and what direction you're pushing the control pad. Generally speaking, the A button are more aggressive attacks, and the B button are more defensive moves. It doesn't hold completely true, though. If you're far away from somebody, pressing a button will do a slap, or the Tsuppari, which the game takes its name from.
If you're close, pressing a button will initiate a grapple. And when you're grappled, you should press in a direction and then mash a button as hard as you can to throw somebody. Every time you do an effective move, you get a little bit of stamina back, and naturally your opponent loses a little bit of stamina. You don't gain as much as they lose, so over the course of a match, the stamina bars eventually go down to 0. If the bar is flashing, you're in a state where you're able to knock the other player out if they are at 0 stamina. In sumo, they lose the match if they are tossed from the ring or thrown to the ground. The most effective way to attack that I found was to push away from you and mash B when you're in a grapple. That throws them behind you. Then you can follow up with another slap from B. That seemed to be the most effective way to rapidly drain somebody's stamina meter. But you can also pick them up, or throw them forward, or you could slam together and bonk each other on the head. Even though the sprites are exactly the same, there are a ton of animations for it, and your character is always colored distinctly enough that you don't lose track of them. You might have to face down a purple wrestler, but at least you know who you are. The rabbit acting as referee, for what it's worth, is Tecmo's mascot at the time. He's been included in other game packaging, but this is the first time he's appeared in a game. It has another cute touch. If you hit pause, a guy comes out to sweep the ring. In between rounds, you can press select. That brings up your win-loss record for both career and the tournament, and it gives you a password to continue with. There's a secret move I didn't manage to pull off, and I do mean pull off. One of the moves removes your opponent's clothes, and you do get full frontal nudity. It's not a move you want to do since it disqualifies you, but it can happen. Naturally, there's a 2-player mode, and I think that's a large part of why this game was so beloved. The biggest problem with Tsuppari Oozumou is that a lot of the action isn't really distinguishable from button mashing. It doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of strategy available to you, and hitting that button as fast as you can is one of the key things you need to reduce their stamina. That said, it is a fun game to sit down and play through a tournament. Matches are short, so that only takes about 10 to 15 minutes. I get why Tsuppari Oozumou wasn't localized to the US. Even if it wasn't about Japan's national sport, there's a lot of things in it that would be tough to localize. But it's also not too hard to play, and it was the best sumo game around for quite a while. We're going to see 2 more sumo games before the Famicom is done. One is more of an RPG, and the other features robots. So if you want an 8-bit sumo game, this is really your best option. Fortunately, it's also pretty good. I really want to like Senshi Dan. There's a lot of clever ideas in it, and it looks pretty good. But then when I play it, the stiff controls and how tough it is to dodge enemy shots leaves me disappointed. It wouldn't even take that much more polish to improve the game. Just make the jumping a little bit better. Just a little bit. And Senshi Dan would be an enjoyable game. Instead, it's a disappointment. This is Atlus's second game ever. Their first one was Megami Tensei, which was released just 1 week before Senshi Dan. Atlus was a developer for hire for quite a while. Though when they finally start publishing their own games, they do manage to get 2 out for the Famicom. Senshi Dan is another game in the action-adventure genre, which I think we can safely say is now the dominant genre on the Famicom. There's 5 stages, each taking place in its own time period. The story is that Dan is a guy who has alien biotechnology implanted in his body so that he can time travel and stop those aliens from taking over the world. And each stage is a maze that you have to work your way through. You start out with just a knife to defend yourself, and on your journey you'll find shops where you can purchase new weapons and upgrade your existing ones. You get energy from killing some enemies, and that energy is used both as your weapon ammunition and as currency. Energy pods give you 10 units back, so if you can defeat your foe before that much drains, you get a net profit. The weapons I found were the heat knife, which you start with, and it costs 0 energy. If you upgrade it, the blade shoots out a little bit and comes back. The knife is by far the weakest weapon, and once you have anything else, you'll probably want to use it. The spider shot is your basic gun, and it's actually built into Dan's arm. It only costs 2 energy to use, and it can be upgraded to increase the damage output. The spider shot can also reveal some hidden passages. Next up is the smart bomb. It flies in a high arc and then explodes. Senshi Dan has a bad tendency to place enemies just above your reach, which makes this the best weapon to use for them. It costs 6 energy per shot though. The Pulsar bee is a discus that shoots straight out and returns. The big advantage of it is that the shot will pass through solid objects. It can also hit enemies multiple times, and it's especially useful against bosses. Each shot of it takes 4 energy. The rolling shot surrounds you with a halo of bullets. It only lasts a moment, and it costs 6 energy. I didn't find that one to be especially useful. There's also some power-up items you can buy. You can only carry one of these at a time though. There's scanner goggles that will let you see in dark places. It's only useful on level 2. The jet shoes make you move significantly faster. That seems nice on the surface, but I ran into an issue with it. Dan has some stiff jumping movement, and he tends to collide with things and then fall down. The additional speed you get from the jet shoes winds up making some jumps nearly impossible as you hit the edge but can't get over. The Psycho Barrier reduces all damage that you take by half. That's easily the best option if it's available. Another distinctive thing you can find in those side rooms is this guy. He wants to have a wrestling match with you. All you have to do is mash A as fast as you can, and if you get him to the end, then he gives you a lot of energy. The maximum energy is 999, and it isn't that hard to reach, especially with big energy boosters like that lying around. The other significant thing in those doors are inns. You give them some energy, and then you spend the night in a traditional Japanese inn. You can only use an inn once though, so you might want to save it for when you really need it. As you're running around the stages and fighting monsters, you might spot that some of them evolve. For evolving monsters, they have 4 forms, and if you leave them running around, they'll eventually change to the next one. Since there isn't a greater reward for defeating the stronger enemies, that's a bad thing for you. Another issue if you're going slow? The MV in the upper right hand corner is the boss's hit points. They're constantly increasing as you play through each stage. Get to the boss fast, and it'll only take a few hits to defeat. Take your time, and you're in trouble. You'll have to exit their room and then come back, letting them have a chance to rebuild their health. And that's one of the more annoying things in Senshi Dan. The side passages aren't really well marked. If you see a big square just floating up in the air, that's probably a side passage. Sometimes it's not though. And there's plenty of them that are invisible. There's always unique power-ups behind those too. Things like weapons and weapon power-ups. So you effectively have to locate them. On the stages, the first and second stage are relatively linear. There's a few branches you need to take to collect items, but you can just stick to the path to get to the end. Stage 3 is where it opens up, and becomes a lot more complicated. You'll find a lot of branching paths there, and there are multiple routes to get to the boss, some faster than others. I've already mentioned the clunky movement in Senshi Dan, but there's a lot to it. The jumping is almost Castlevania style, except Dan's kind of sticky when he collides with things. And it's not always clear what platforms are reachable. Crouching is also a little bit odd. You'll press down and after a short delay you'll lay flat, and you can crawl around on your belly until you press up again. That slow responsiveness becomes an issue when it comes to dodging projectiles.
All of the higher level enemies have some kind of shot, and it's almost impossible to either jump over them or duck under them. There's just too much of a delay and not enough control. So I wound up soaking up a lot of damage rather than being able to dodge it. If you get a game over, it automatically continues you 5 times. Though when you do continue, you go back to the start of the stage that you died on, and everything has been reset. Despite my annoyance with Senshi Dan, it is well liked in Japan. I think a lot of that comes down to how nice the game looks. It does look nice. It's one of the better looking Famicom games we've had. But that gameplay just needed a little bit more refinement. At least it's not a particularly difficult game. I was following a guide and made it pretty far. Would I play Senshi Dan again? Yeah, probably would. There's just enough here to keep me going, and I feel like I could beat it with a little bit more effort. But I think I'd play a lot of other games in preference to this one. Never let it be said that I don't give the audience what they want. Hardcore Mahjong action. Ide Yosuke Meijin no Jissen Mahjong is a bit of a funny one too. It's our first Mahjong game with a celebrity endorsement. As you might guess, Ide Yosuke was a popular Mahjong player. He wrote quite a few books on the subject, and he lent his name to a lot of Mahjong games, only 2 of which were on the Famicom and by Capcom. The game also came with a specialty controller which was kind of similar to arcade Mahjong games. And the controller is required to play the game. Now you might think it's kind of pathetic to own a Mahjong controller for the Famicom, but I'd say what's really pathetic is to own 2 of the same Mahjong controller for the Famicom. I bought one controller on its own so I'd be able to record this video, and then ordered a cheap boxed copy of the second game so I got another controller. Mahjong is a popular set building game, where typically you want to build sets of 3 or runs of 3 out of the tiles. It's very similar to Rummy. The variation played in Japan is Richi Mahjong, and it has a set of very specific hands that you have to build in order to go out. Ide Yosuke's Mahjong game feels very full-featured. The first menu option is Actual Mahjong, where you play against a computer in a 2-player match. There are some very extensive options there to set up your own house rules. The third menu option is for a Mahjong quiz, where you're asked what tile you want to throw away, given a particular game situation. I did not score highly at that. The middle option is the real meat of the game. It's for Tournament Mahjong. And there you'll play a series of 2-player matches against different computer opponents. I didn't see any way to continue this one, so you could have to play this mode for quite a while to complete a tournament. So I guess the big question is, how well does the controller work? And you know, it's pretty good. It does mean that the game doesn't hold your hand quite as much as some of the previous Mahjong games we've seen, though it does highlight tiles when you're able to draw from the other player's discard. It did take me a couple moments to figure out how to make the additional bet when you're 1 tile away from completing a hand, or how to reveal my hand once I've completed it. One thing about Richi Mahjong is that you don't have to show that you've won once your hand is complete. You could always keep drawing tiles and try to go for a higher scoring hand. I'm nowhere near good enough at Mahjong to even try that, though. As for the computer opponents, but I didn't see any real signs of heavy cheating on their part. No declaring that they're about to go out on the 3rd tile drawn or anything like that. As an utter novice at Mahjong, I found Ide Yosuke Meijin no Jissen Mahjong to be a pretty enjoyable Mahjong game. Having a better interface definitely helps. It's not quite as beginner-friendly as Nintendo's Mahjong, but if you've made it over that tiny initial hump, I think this one's the better choice.
Wow, it feels like we've stepped back in time to 1983. HAL released 3 arcade ports in the space of a few weeks in 1987, all of which were licensed from Williams and Atari, and all 3 are Golden Age arcade games. The ports are very in the style of the initial Famicom releases, but by late 1987, these games felt very primitive. 35 years on, and we can look back and say these are classics, but in 1987, that was the boring old stuff. As a result, these 3 releases are actually a bit rare. They're not outrageously expensive, but you are going to pay a premium if you want a copy. The first to arrive was my second favorite of the 3, Stargate. Stargate was the sequel to Defender, and in the arcade it had a reputation for being outrageously difficult. Part of that was the complex control scheme where the only joystick was to move you up and down. Everything else was controlled by buttons. The title's a little bit confusing here. The arcade game is Stargate, 1 word. The Famicom game is Stargate, 2 words. And then the US version of the Famicom game is Defender 2. That change was due to Williams Electronics trying to maintain the trademark on Defender. The game is a score attack arcade shooter where aliens have come to Earth to kidnap humans and turn them into mutants. These green ships are landers. They're the ones that will abduct humans, and they'll fly down low, locate somebody, and then start going straight up into the air. You need to shoot the lander, but not the person, and then save the person from falling to their death by catching them. What height you catch them at determines how many points you get for the human. There are 2 tools that can help you with an abduction. First, watch the radar at the top of the screen. When a lander is going straight up, it has a person. Second, the Stargate automatically teleports you to any human that's being abducted. There's 1 of these on each stage. Just fly into it and you're sent away. In terms of controls, the A button fires, and the B button launches a smart bomb, which destroys all enemies on the screen. You have a limited number of those, and they're pretty handy for catching landers right as they're about to escape. One useful thing to know about navigation is that the map loops infinitely. It's only about 4 screens across, and if you go in one direction, you'll just get back to where you started from. On every stage, you have to destroy a certain number of aliens before you can continue. There are defined waves that include a fixed number of landers, and a few crafts that will shoot at you. Also, if you take too long, more aliens spawn in. These don't necessarily count towards the aliens you have to destroy, though. Some of the difficulty of the arcade game carries over to the Famicom in how much momentum your ship has. It takes a little bit to get going, and a little bit to come to a stop, and if you go fast, you will run right into an enemy. I generally find it better to move in bursts, taking it a little bit more gently to avoid running into anything. There's one more odd thing to mention about the Famicom version of Stargate. Take a listen to the music when you start up the game. It's an extended version of Punch-Out's fanfare. It's not the only Punch-Out song in here either. Stargate is very straightforward, and part of that is that almost all of the complex elements from the arcade game have been eliminated. You no longer have a dwindling supply of humans that you have to protect. Humans that you catch just go into your ship, and they don't have to be lowered to the ground. And if all of the humans are abducted, nothing happens. They all come back at the start of the next stage. Even the special stages have been removed. The result is a game that feels okay, but you can also tell that it's missing some things. It's a solid, fast-paced score attack game, but as somebody who likes the arcade, I feel like too much has been stripped out. It's missing the bits that gave it some extra challenge. Stargate is not bad, but it just could have been so much better. Sometimes I play a game and I can just see how these little episodes will come together. There's a good moment here, some mechanics to explain there, and it's all very nice. And then there's Kyonshis 2, where I have an hour of footage and absolutely no clue what happened in it. This is a game that doesn't work on multiple levels, and is actively hostile to any attempt to play it. There's so many things wrong, it doesn't even make a coherent design. The developer of this one is Thinking Rabbit, the makers of Sokoban. They were a computer game publisher, and as far as I can tell, they only developed 2 Famicom games that were released. This and 8 Eyes. So maybe they should have stuck to computer games. Kyonshis 2 is a sequel to the movie Kyonshi. There would eventually be a movie Kyonshi 2, but it has nothing to do with the game, and wasn't out when the game was released. And naturally, there is no game for the original Kyonshi. So Japan got their very own Goonies 2 here. The movie Kyonshi was originally titled Yohuan Daoshi in China, and in some English-speaking markets is known as Hello Dracula. It's about a young girl and her Taoist priest grandfather fighting hopping vampires. And as part of that, they get the assistance of 4 orphaned brothers, and those 4 orphans are the main characters of this game. For those unfamiliar with the concept of the hopping vampire, they're reanimated corpses whose limbs are so stiff that they can only hop around. They sustain themselves by draining life force from their victims. The story of Kyonshis 2 is that after the events of the first movie, the heroine Ten accidentally released another horde of hopping vampires on the city. Also, 3 of the 4 orphan brothers had their souls stolen, and now everyone needs to go beat up some hopping vampires. The very first thing you do in this game is select Player 1 or Player 2. This is not a 2-player game. Those are actually the save slots. That's right, this is a game with a battery backup. When you select a slot, you're then given a choice of which of the 4 brothers you want to play as. You can continue the one that you were playing before, or you can start playing as one of the other brothers, which resets all progress for the first one. You can also completely delete all the save data too. And now you're wandering around a city in China. This is actually going to be the bulk of your game. You can enter most of the buildings, even the ones that don't have doors, because they have doors on the sides that you can't see. And if you can't tell what the buildings are from just the graphics, that's because there is no association between the building graphic and what's inside it. You'll find shops, restaurants, and fighting dojos as the most common ones. Also, each of the 4 brothers has a different set of buildings that will deal with them. Sometimes it's that they'll get a discount, but a lot of the times it's that they just won't sell to you, period, if you're the wrong brother. There's quite a few minor quests to do in the city, but all the triggers are out in the open, so if you're following a guide, you can just walk to the end and take the item. The central building is the house of Ten and Grandpa, the heroes of the film who don't do anything in this game. Ten will let you rest at the house, and Grandpa will give you money if you capture a hopping vampire. Resting at the house is how you save your game, so if you die and have to continue, you also go back to the last time you rested at the house. There's a day-night cycle in Kyonshis 2. It takes a long time to kick in. About 20 minutes. Resting at the house sets the time back to morning, too. The difference between day and night? Well, you can't go into the shops at night, and at night the people that you rarely encounter on the street to give you nonsense clues are replaced by rarely appearing vampires. As you walk around, you can press the A button to bring up a menu. The top option is Use. It's solely used for eating food and taking medicine, both of which recover your stamina. Next is the equipment screen, where you can decide what you're wearing. Then there's Drop, just in case you wanted to get rid of something. Below that are Tools, which are generally items that get you into something. Then we have Stats, and Stats is its own problem. At the top is Stamina, that's your hit points. Those max out at 64. Then there's Speed, Offensive Power, Defensive Power, and Luck. Speed and defense do nothing in this game. All four brothers have different stats, but two of the stats are completely worthless. Back to the main menu, you've got Search, which is used for looking around and taking things. And then finally you have Date, which will tell you how long you've been on your quest. Inside Buildings has its own set of commands. You can talk to the person there, look around inside. There's a command that's Take, but if you select it in the game, you try to steal something. That usually results in you getting kicked out of the shop, but you can just re-enter it. You can give something to the person who's in there. A good example of this is giving this pass to this guard to get access to the city walls. And finally, you can just leave. One of the first things you have to do is recover a lost pass that will let you get access to the secure areas of the city. It's been taken by the vampires, and you can find them in this building near your house. So let's go inside and see how we fight vampires. That's it. You're looking at all of the excitement that this game has to offer. The A button kicks, the B button punches, and you press up to jump. I would stick with kicks though. The way that the vampires move, the extra reach of the kick comes in handy. And once you have the rhythm down, you just walk forward a little bit, kick the vampire, walk forward a little bit, kick the vampire, and repeat until the vampire's dead, which will take a very long time. Fortunately, they only attack you one at a time. All of the brothers look different on these side-scrolling screens, but the strategies are exactly the same. On very rare occasions, you'll encounter this vampire who looks like he should be recording videos about old video games on YouTube. He's apparently a boss vampire. I should say, I am told that there are additional enemies if you go into certain special dungeons, but you have to grind up cash for a while in order to access those dungeons, and that means you're going to be going through these fights for a long time. Probably an hour or two. The thing that elevates Kyonshis 2 to being an especially bad game is that the only way to beat the game is to play it 4 times, once with each brother. There's no variation in the quest, you just have to play through the game repeatedly. So you clear the game with one, and then you select another brother. And the last brother that you do this with is the one who can reach the final boss. In Japan, Kyonshis 2 is best known for being completely confusing nonsense. Even Japanese players don't understand the game. The question I'm left with is, why did Taito think that anyone would subject themselves to this game 4 times in order to beat it? The votes are in, and Salamander is the best looking cart on the Famicom. It's the only translucent cart for an officially released game, and it really does look amazing. Salamander could be considered the sequel to Gradius, though Konami tends to split the Salamander games off into their own series. It's the first time we've seen Konami assemble a title out of random kanji when they just wanted a foreign word. They'll do that a few more times. The characters in Salamander's title mean Sand God's Beautiful Snake. Yeah, I couldn't find any interpretation of the second character that made sense. In the US, the title was changed to Life Force, which honestly isn't half bad for random foreign title changes. I actually think I like it better than Salamander, since this game doesn't really have anything to do with salamanders, amphibians, or mythological. Naturally, Salamander started out as an arcade game, and Konami took their time porting it. Salamander had been in the arcades for well over a year at this point. The story is that there's a new set of invaders coming for a planet, and the prince of that world flies off in the Lord British to recruit Vic Viper so that the two of them can team up and take out the invading forces. That was the big feature of Salamander. It's a 2-player simultaneous game, even on the Famicom. The first player flies the Vic Viper, The second player flies the Lord British, which takes its name from game developer Richard Garriott's pseudonym. Strangely enough, we're going to see Garriott's work in about 3 episodes' time. The gameplay in Salamander is very similar to Gradius, with one major exception. When you shoot down certain enemies or formations of them, they leave behind a power-up capsule. Those capsules advance your ship's power-up meter, and you can press A to activate one of them. From left to right, there's speed up. You can do this multiple times to find your sweet spot between control and speed. Personally, I go with twice, but I could definitely see some players going for more. Next up are missiles that fly up and down from your craft and then track along the ground. I actually found the missiles to be a little bit flaky in the Famicom version. They either knock a tough fortification out of the fight, or seem to have no effect at all. You can collect the missile power-up twice. The second time lets you fire off an extra shot. The ripple shot is next. That's the wide beam for the game. Shots from it spread out to cover more area. While laser shoots a constant stream. There's 2 levels of laser power-ups too. The second one makes the beam longer. Between the two, I think ripple's the better power-up. Not that laser's bad. It comes down to this section early on in the game. These blocks respawn once too many have been destroyed. With ripple, you can stay just ahead of it, but getting through with laser requires some amazing precision. It just destroys too much, and the block that you just shot respawns before the beam's finished. Ripple's also helpful for not having to close in so tight on terrain. Salamander has a lot of terrain that spawns in, and you basically have to memorize the level to know where it's going to appear. The power-up after the standard shots are Gradius's big guns, the options. An item so effective that option became the term for that particular type of power-up. You can have 3 of them in Salamander. In the US version, that was reduced to 2. Finally, there's the force field. It's great for absorbing shots, but it can only absorb shots. If enemy ships run into you, or you run into terrain, it's not effective. Salamander has the big problem of the Gradius series. Fully powered up, you can destroy anything. Get hit, you lose everything, and it's almost impossible to build up again. In Salamander, you respawn right back where you died, but what that usually means is that you don't even have a chance to collect power-ups. You might be asking, well, why don't you use the 30 life code and just breeze through the game? Well, that code was added for the US version. Right from the first stage, you can see the game's distinct visual style. The giant biological-looking structures wind up becoming a mainstay of Famicom design. The first stage starts you in an alien organism. You'll fly through these tunnels that grow out to meet you. Have to make your way past these gnashing fangs. Then shoot through these walls of blood vessels. After that, you reach the segment where the walls regrow after you shoot them out. The best strategy there is to just stay as far forward as you can. That brings you to the Stage 1 boss. This giant grasping brain that you have to dodge for a bit until its eye opens. It's actually not that tough to beat, as long as you can get around it the first time. The second stage has you flying vertically through a cavern. That's a new feature Salamander had, and I think it's what Konami considers the difference between the Salamander and Gradius series. Gradius is always horizontal, Salamander adds in some vertical. The major feature of this stage are the volcanoes that spew out rocks. You can actually cap the volcanoes here by shooting at the tips for a bit. When you get toward the end, there will be walls that you have to shoot your way through, and then you'll fight a mini-boss. These 3 cores that you have to destroy. You can take out the shields in front of them before the cores spawn, though. Finally, we reach the boss, this pinwheel. I also found this boss to be pretty easy. Just sit back and shoot forward while you can, and move around it when necessary. It's slow enough that you won't have any trouble dodging. That brings us to the fiery third stage, where fireballs pop out at the ground, and some enemies just turn into fireballs when you shoot them and fly straight at you. You'll also have to deal with flame jets and this dragon. and this is as far as I got. Salamander's a pretty tough game. You will need to memorize the stages to make any kind of progress. You can continue 3 times when you get a game over. That puts you back at the start of the stage, so at least you have a chance to build up a little bit of power. But you can lose everything in an instant in Salamander. Well, everything except 1 capsule, assuming you were holding any when you died. There are 6 stages total in Salamander, always alternating between horizontal and vertical scrolling. You will have to practice and be extremely good to complete this one. Okay, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. There's a lot going on in Salamander, and to deal with it, Konami used 2 tactics. A whole lot of flicker, and a whole lot of slowdown. The flicker can be especially bad when your own ship vanishes. The slowdown I can deal with. It's annoying, but I can manage. That flickering is the price of the intense action in Salamander. In Japan, Salamander is known for a few odd things. The biggest is that there was a delay in the release, and so Konami put out a commercial to announce the delay of the game. The other thing is disappointment in how much was changed from the arcade version. The Famicom version completely changes a few levels, as well as alters the music heavily, and that seems to put off some Japanese players. I also found comments that clearing just past the 3rd stage was an accomplishment, which makes me feel better. I find Salamander to be pretty good, but not top tier. We're actually going to get 2 more games spawned out of this series before the Famicom is done, and the next one is actually my favorite of them. But that doesn't mean Salamander isn't worth it. At the very least, you get the cool cartridge. We're back to HAL again with the 2nd entry in their arcade game trilogy. And of the 3, Millipede is my least favorite. That doesn't mean it's bad, just that I think it's the one with the most weaknesses. Just for a little bit of context, I was really good at Centipede, the predecessor to Millipede in the arcades. Not really fond of Millipede in the arcade, but I could play it pretty well. So when I put this cartridge in and played this version of Millipede for the first time in over a year, on my first game I made it to the 14th board. And then once I was warmed up, I was doing even better. Before we get into the game itself, I have to talk about the packaging. In US versions of Millipede, your character is an archer fighting off an army of bugs in a fantasy setting, but here we have a spaceship attacking the giant bugs. They also added a hyphen in between Millie and Pede, which isn't there in the title screen, and gave the game a subtitle, Kyodai Konchu no Yakushu, which, appropriately enough for the middle part of a trilogy, could be translated as The Giant Bugs Strike Back. The game is a single-screen arcade shooter, where you can move freely in the lower portion of the screen, and have to take out the crawling millipede that's creeping along and flipping directions every time it bumps into something. Shooting part of the millipede turns that segment into a mushroom, and if you shoot it in the middle, that means you have 2 millipedes. Wipe out all of the millipede segments, and you advance to the next stage, which means that the color changes and a new millipede starts at the top. There's no break in the action in Millipede. In the arcade, your movements are controlled via a trackball. That's a big feature of the game, giving you some really precise control and rapid movement when you need it. That's not an option here. The digital input from the controller just doesn't feel nearly as smooth. It works, but it's also a big step down. There's more bugs than the millipede that are harassing you. The spiders are what's generally the real threat in this game. They spawn in at the edge of the screen toward the bottom and hop up and down through the player's area. A handy thing about the spiders is that they eat the mushrooms. Mushrooms block your movement and shots, and destroying them takes multiple hits, so the spiders eating them is actually pretty helpful. On later stages, the spiders start to multiply, and because they're always in your play area, they are the biggest threat to you. Spiders are also one of the big sources of points. What score you get for shooting them depends on how close they are to you, so hold your fire and let them close in. The spider's annoying counterpart would be the bee. They start at the top of the screen and drop down rapidly, planting mushrooms as they go. On stages where they're common, they can fill up the play area pretty quickly. The worst version of the bees are the dragonflies. They get some waves all to themselves, and move in a zigzag pattern down the screen while planting mushrooms. The beetle creeps in at the side of the screen, and then moves down to the bottom. It'll crawl along there for a little ways before going up again. Any mushroom it comes into contact with turns into a flower, and flowers are indestructible. Shooting the beetle makes the whole screen drop down one row, which is something that happens when you complete a stage as well. That can be helpful for clearing the bottom of the screen, or getting more bombs to appear. The earwig tends to appear toward the top of the screen, and any mushroom it contacts become poisonous. The only indication you have that they're poisonous is that they flip direction. If the millipede touches one of those, it drops straight down to the bottom of the screen. This is actually good for you, since the millipede going straight down means you shoot all the segments very quickly. Finally, there's the inchworm, which appears lower down than the earwig, and if you shoot it, everybody else slows down for a little bit. Very useful for making sure you get those big points off the spiders. When it comes to shooting all these things, you can only have one shot on the screen at a time, but you can hold down the fire button to shoot another one immediately. That's a useful tactic for taking out the mushrooms quickly, but when you're closing in on something like a spider, hold off on firing until you're ready. The other important feature are the DDT bombs. Shooting one of those releases a cloud of insecticide and makes a silent spring. Naturally, any enemies running into that cloud get killed. And that's literally everything you need to know about Millipede. PAL reworked the graphics of these Famicom games when they released them in the US, but the visuals in the Famicom version feel closer to the arcade. This is a solid port, whose biggest failings is that it can't really replicate the arcade nicely. I can see other people enjoying this, but as somebody who's very familiar with the arcade games, it's a big stumbling block for me. I think Kaiketsu Yanchamaru is a good summation of the state of the Famicom in 1987. It's not an especially good game, but it's a competent one. Just good enough to provide the entertainment value that you'd want from it, and then it's done. It's got more detail and more action going on, though it's not well implemented. However, its sequel will improve on the game tremendously, and then the extra rare third game in this series isn't quite as good as you'd hope. Kaiketsu Yanchamaru was an arcade game first, and I played Kid Nicky Radical Ninja quite a bit in the arcades. And as a result, I have a bit of a soft spot for this game, even though I can tell it's not very good. Strangely enough, looking up some Japanese sources, I found a lot of the same sentiment. A lot of people going, yeah, it's a bad game, but I still kind of like it. The story of this game is Kaiketsu Yanchamaru is a young ninja in training, and one day while practicing, he gets a message calling for help, and in 1987 that was more than enough story for a video game. There's 8 side-scrolling action stages to make your way through before you reach the final boss, and save the inevitable princess. Yanchamaru's primary weapon is his sword-spinning technique. He twirls his weapon in front of him like a baton when you press B. Enemies you hit with it fly away. Along the way, there's also a handful of power-ups you can get. This bell lets you throw your sword. And collecting this bell gives you a shield that will knock away enemies. There's also these coins, I guess, that are just worth a few points. There's one checkpoint in every stage, about halfway through. I did find a bug with it, though. Some enemies don't spawn in unless you die and use the checkpoint. Very strange. At the end of every stage, naturally, there's a boss, and the bosses have a bit of an odd property to them. If you hit them with your sword, then your sword flies out of your hand. You'll have to recover it before you can attack again. If it flies completely out of your reach, you'll just have to jump up from underneath it. Then it will appear in your hand once you're on the ground. Some bosses do have to be hit in special ways, like this centipede, you have to knock its segments off. Or with this big guy, you have to get him in the butt while he's landing. Any hit will kill you in Kaiketsu Yanchamaru, though the enemies themselves generally aren't overwhelming. On the other hand, if you die to a boss, you're going back to the level checkpoint. One kindness in this game, when you get a game over, continues right on the main menu. Getting to the problems with this game, the first one is that it doesn't have a difficulty curve so much as a difficulty pendulum. Things will be tremendously easy for a long stretch, and then suddenly spike to incredibly difficult. The bosses are commonplaces for that. The first time I died to this monk, I didn't even know what happened. It's simple when you know the pattern, but if you're standing in the wrong spot, you just fall over dead, never even seeing his bullet. Then there's these stone platforms, which include my second biggest problem. The bubble spawns are random. You won't know if it's safe to jump until you've already jumped. And you have to do this multiple times. That other problem is one of my least favorite bugs ever. It's not unique to Kaiketsu Yanchamaru. I still see it a lot to this very day. If you're standing on a platform that's moving down at a large enough rate of speed, like these rocks, where if a game isn't coded to move you down at the same rate as the platform, then there's a gap that occurs in between the platform moving down and you moving down to catch up to the platform. And in that gap, while you're in midair, the jump button doesn't work. From the perspective of a player, it's eating your inputs at random. And it's not like moving platforms are placed in the easy platforming sections either. These days I mainly see it from people who code their games around physics systems, rather than building something specifically for platforming. Any platformer that does this is a bad game. Which brings me full circle. No matter how you look at it, Kaiketsu Yanchamaru is a pretty bad game. It looks like something hastily run off to cash in on the boom, and you can see the hand of Tensei in how the gameplay's been implemented. But there's still something to it. Those moments when you have a good flow in the action as you're running along, sticking your sword out for a moment. And that diverse cast of enemies is actually kind of neat. The bosses are all pretty nifty too. They're all distinctive and bring a new challenge to the game. And that's what Kaiketsu Yanchamaru brings to us. It's a bad game, but it's one that comes tantalizingly close to being good. When I started playing Pulsar no Hikari, I was thinking, oh, this will make for a good video. Even if the game is just okay, there's so much stuff around it. And then I played it. Or perhaps the better way to put that is, tried to play it. Because Pulsar no Hikari is a disaster. One of those games where every design decision makes you go, why would they do that? But before I talk about Pulsar no Hikari, I first have to talk about Star Trek. Not that Star Trek. Or that one. I'm talking about Star Trek the Mainframe game. It wasn't an official Star Trek game, but this simple text-based strategy game is one of the most influential games from the early days of computing. It stands right next to Colossal Cave, D&D, and Pong as one of the foundational games that much of video games as a medium is built on. And the reason I'm bringing it up here is that Pulsar no Hikari is a port of Star Trek.
The ports of Star Trek are actually a complicated subject because anyone could look at the source code and modify it, and virtually anybody who was programming a computer in the 1970s did just that. And there are already several games that were Star Trek but with more action, most notably Star Raiders from Atari. So Pulsar no Hikari was on a well-worn path. That said, this is the console game that I feel most closely resembles playing Star Trek. The only really significant difference between it and a computer version is some very slight action-y elements. And those barely work as action. When you start Pulsar no Hikari, after the lengthy unskippable credits sequence, you choose how many aliens there will be in the galaxy and how many space stations. The goal of Pulsar no Hikari is to destroy all the aliens before they destroy all of the space stations. After you get your teletyped orders from headquarters, you're dropped off in a random location in a random space sector, and hopefully the game did not spawn you inside an astronomical object, because that will be fatal once you try to move your ship. This happened to me in my first game of Pulsar no Hikari. You start from the command screen, and while you're here, time is not passing. On the command screen you can see how much energy you have, how many torpedoes you have left, the status of the galaxy, and your current coordinates. You can also see your current damage report here. Hitting select will bring up a menu, and you select an option from it by pressing the select button again. The top option is Tsukai mode, or mission mode, and that's the overhead action segment. And I'm actually going to talk about that last because it's the most complicated part. Then you have the short-range sensors. These show you the positions of everything in your current sector, which are also visible from the mission mode screen. Any alien ships that are in the sector with you have their current energy reading here, as well as the ship name displayed. The long-range sensors scan the area around your ship, looking at the 8 neighboring sectors. This readout of information also corresponds to the next option, the galaxy map. Each sector is represented by a 2x2 block of characters. In the upper left you have the number of alien ships. Then the upper right are the number of asteroids. The lower left has a character indicating any special features in that sector. If there are planets, a star, a base, or something like that. And then the number in the lower right is how many of those features are there. Usually it's going to be 1, but very occasionally there's 2 planets in one sector. The report option just takes you back to the same screen that you get when you hit select. Warp means that you're ready to send the ship into warp. There's no downside to picking this option whenever. You don't use energy to prepare, you don't have to select coordinates, it's effectively a useless option. Similarly, the torpedo option is effectively useless. It loads a torpedo into a tube. So if you want to use torpedoes, you have to go to this menu, load the torpedo, go to the mission mode, which is where you fire the torpedoes, and then return here to reload the torpedoes. The final option is the phaser, and that's where you input how much energy you want to use every time you fire the phaser. This is a 4-digit number, and phasers automatically target any enemy ship in the sector. If the amount of energy you pump into an alien ship is greater than their remaining energy, then it just explodes. So what you do is use the short-range sensor to see how much energy they have left, then go to phasers and put in slightly higher than that, and then go into the mission mode to effortlessly destroy them. The catch with the phasers is that it's using up your energy supply, and if you run out of power, then it's game over. Okay, now let's talk about mission mode. Here you have an overhead view of the space sector you're in, and there's a crosshair that represents where your ship is pointed. You have a full 360 degrees of movement here. You rotate it by hitting left and right, and it can take a very long time to rotate your ship. If it goes too fast for you, for some reason, holding down B while you press left and right will slow that rotation. Pressing up and down will fire your fore and aft thrusters, and you have some Newtonian mechanics here. Once your ship starts moving, it keeps moving. And you can see the current horizontal and vertical speed in the lower right-hand corner. If you bump into the edge of the sector, nothing happens. The only way you can go to the next sector is using a warp. Warping is performed by pointing your ship in the direction you want to go and pressing start, assuming you've enabled the warp drive. After accelerating out of the sector, you'll see a counter for how far you've flown, and you press the A button to reappear in the new sector. Hopefully you didn't fly out of the galaxy, because that's an instant game over. The galaxy is an 8x8 grid, and every sector seems to be 8 ticks of that counter high and 8 ticks across. If there's something in the way when you try to go to warp, obviously you're going to crash, and that's a game over. So you might have to do a little bit of light navigation around hazards. When you encounter an enemy, the A button will fire your weapon, assuming you've armed one. As I mentioned, phasers automatically target any ship in the sector, and if there's multiple ships in a sector, then the power that you fired is divided between them. Torpedoes are fired at where the crosshair is aimed, and torpedoes travel relatively slowly, so you'll have to take some cautious aim. The alien craft will slowly float around, not really in any direction, and occasionally take a shot at you. If you get hit, then you lose a bit of energy. To recover your energy and torpedoes, you have to fly to one of the bases, and these require that you carefully maneuver yourself to the docking port. When you're lined up horizontally, a box will appear. Then you have to back into the dock, pointing your ship away from it and using the retro thrusters to guide yourself in. And that's how the game goes. You slowly work your way around the galaxy, hopefully finding the alien ships and destroying them, before they move in on the bases and destroy those. If you manage to destroy all of the aliens, then you win, and you get a flat screen of text with a code that seems to have been intended for a competition that never occurred. If you get a game over, whether by losing all your energy, crashing, or flying out of the galaxy, you go back to the main menu where you can start a new game. And if you start a new game, the game crashes. So if you get a game over, you need to reset the console, then sit through the unskippable credit sequence again, and then you can start a new game. This isn't going to surprise you, but Pulsar no Hikari is not a popular game in Japan. The very few people who noticed its existence also mostly complained about not being able to figure out how to play it. It seems likely that they just weren't familiar with Star Trek, the computer game. The big problem with Pulsar no Hikari is that it is a game that is packed with complexity that adds absolutely nothing to it. It feels like it's this way because the developers were trying to make things more realistic, but it's a false realism, and it winds up just getting in the way. There's these massive planets that get in the way of your navigation. They don't add anything to the space sector. They're not an actual challenge to deal with. They just slow you down. And the stars are even worse in that regard. At least the black holes as a hazard are something you have to escape from immediately, and the pulsar's energy-draining effects give a different kind of navigational hazard. But otherwise, those big structures just wind up being annoying. And similarly, you can have up to 15 asteroids in a sector. They don't do anything. You can blow them up if they're in your way with a torpedo, but there's no resources from them. They don't affect the alien ships. They don't even move around on their own. They're just lumps that are there, not doing anything. 360 degrees of navigation gives you a lot of options for movement, but practically, you really want to restrict yourself to just a few. And it makes steering painfully slow to have to go through that full rotation. The phasers trivialize any combat encounters. Even with the heavy energy drain, there's no penalty for going back to a base. And short-range sensors add nothing over the mission mode. All the important data that you'd get from the sensors could easily be displayed there. They took the turn-based structure of the original Star Trek computer game and poorly bolted on something that was supposed to be an action game, and that made both halves actively worse. Play Star Trek. You might not like it, but it's an important piece of video game history that you should at least be aware of. Don't bother with Pulsar no Hikari, though. That's the version that's a lot worse. I don't want to be mean or grumpy when I make these videos, When I play one of these disk system games that I have no knowledge of, I want to be pleasantly surprised. I want to at least go, here's where they did something neat. And they make it so hard to do that. Kalin no Tsurugi is a game that heavily leans into the trends in Japanese computer RPGs at the time, but it implements those systems poorly, and it doesn't add anything to it. Kalin no Tsurugi was developed by Crystalsoft. Yeah, they spell their name with an X and they pronounce that cross, but it's Crystalsoft. Crystalsoft was one of the mid-sized developers in those early days of Japanese RPGs and adventure games. They published things like the Mugen no Shinzo series, the Crimson series, and Earthbound. Not that Earthbound. Only one Crystalsoft game was ever released outside of Japan, and it's, well, a bit of a mess. Kalin no Tsurugi for the FDS was published by DOG, the Disc Original Group, a publishing collective headed up by Square intended to make it easier for computer developers to publish on the Famicom. The plot of the game is that in a fantasy kingdom, monsters suddenly started showing up, and the only person who might possibly stop them is the wizard Gladriff. But Gladriff is missing, so it falls on you as a descendant of the hero Karin to go find him and hopefully stop the monster invasion. You start your quest outside of a castle, and you'll want to go in before one of the monsters roaming the countryside bumps into you. To enter the castle or interact with things other than people, you have to hit the A button to access the menu on the side. The menu commands are Enter, Stairs, Search, Status, and Save. Saving is a bit special in Kalin no Tsurugi. You have three options there: Quick Save, Load, and Save to Disk. The Quick Save is a feature that they borrowed from Highglide. It saves your current position and a few vital statistics to the Famicom's memory, and then if you're defeated, you can reload from that. This was a big feature in the ads for the game, which bragged that you could save the game in 0.08 seconds. Of course, you have to save to the disk if you want to turn the game off. Also, the advertising for this one's a bit notorious. The ads made a lot of promises that the game didn't actually keep. Things like claiming that you had 60 different ways to attack, when really it was that there were 6 weapons you could use and 10 items that you could use. So no, that math doesn't even make any sense. It also boasted about the variety of enemy attack patterns, when really there was only one attack pattern. Let's just say there's still some people who are bitter about getting suckered into buying this one. When you bump into a monster, that starts combat, and that takes you to a sub-screen where you fight them in a method very similar to ease. You want to bump into the monster, and you have to keep pushing in that direction to attack. If you let the control pad sit idle, then you'll just take damage. You'll very quickly notice a problem with the combat here. It's often unfair. Monsters attack you in groups of 1 to 8. You don't know how many monsters will be there until combat starts. And you could be dropped down right in the middle of monsters, and then they run right into you, effectively eating away your life bar. When you get hit by a monster, you're stunned for a second, so it's possible that you just get held in place, hit over and over again. Especially if you're getting hit from multiple directions. And all of that is something that can occur in the first quarter second of combat. This can be just about instantly fatal for you, and it's a problem that's consistent throughout the game. But it gets worse. Kalin no Tsurugi has a scaling issue. Every enemy type has a base XP and gold reward that you get when you defeat them, and then you get a multiplier based on how many were in a group. But it's not a linear multiplier. Defeating small groups gives you a lot more XP per enemy defeated than defeating large groups, while gold goes the opposite way. What this all boils down to as you play is that you earn XP a lot more quickly than you earn money. And unlike most games, leveling up is not necessarily what you want to do. Leveling up in Kalin no Tsurugi increases your maximum HP and your maximum MP, and that's it. Attack and defense are solely governed by what equipment you have. That still doesn't sound too bad. You've got more health, you could use that to defeat more enemies before you go back to heal. Well, healing in this game is expensive, and it gets more expensive as you level up. If you manage to find a doctor, it costs 10 gold per level to be restored to maximum health. Potions give you 20 HP at the cost of 30 gold. And doing a little bit of math here, it means that every point of damage you take costs you 2 to 3 gold, and that actually gets worse as you level up. But the gold you're getting from enemies doesn't scale like that. As I mentioned, gold scales more slowly than XP, which means leveling up makes grinding up money to get that better equipment even harder. While I was playing, I was struggling a lot to make any kind of headway. Eventually, I decided to just progress the game's story a little bit, and that was actually the key because the reward for completing the first very simple quest was enough money to get me the better sword that was available, as well as one of the magic items for the game. And it's the magic item that can convert your MP to HP. Items are used by pressing select to bring up your inventory, choosing what you're going to use, and then hitting B. Some things like the fire wand, which shoots fireballs, or the white idol, which heals you, cost some magic, while other items like potions are consumables. Magic points recover over time, and that really makes them a situation where you have to use them. You either will have to rely on it for healing, or for defeating enemies without taking any damage. You're also going to be heavily dependent on that save function, because any combat you enter could instantaneously destroy your resources. So every time you have a good fight, you'll want to save your game. The world in Kalin no Tsurugi is presented in a series of screens, similar to the way RPGs on most Japanese computers worked at the time, due to not really having any ability to scroll the screen easily. But the world wasn't really designed to fit those divided up sections, as well there's screens that are just tiny fragments of areas that you can step onto. Enemies appear at the edges of screens, so you'll always be at risk of getting attacked when you're moving to a new map square. This isn't a game that really has a fan base in Japan. It's mainly remembered for being a commercial flop that effectively brought about the end of the disc operating group. There are still 2 more dog games to go, including one by Crystal, but those won't be released for 10 months, and this was the moment that Square decided that the experiment had failed and they needed to pull the plug. Kalin no Tsurugi has a very rough start, and they don't really do a great job of signposting where you should go in the world. For example, the very first quest you encounter will want you to bring back the fruit of a magic tree, and that's all of the information you get. It's actually this one lone forest square on this one random map tile. A lot of the game is like that. You can just follow along with a walkthrough, but it really feels like they tried to make this one extra impenetrable. This is far from the worst action RPG I've encountered, but it is mediocre in ways that it didn't need to be. When you're actually trying to maneuver around and hit enemies, it's not bad. Well, as long as you're not getting stuck on terrain. But that only happens sometimes, and then other times you just get trashed and you can't do anything about it. Kalin no Tsurugi quickly drains away any fun that you might have been able to find in it.
Welcome to Famicom RPG Fest. 7 of the next 8 games are ones that people classify as RPGs, though I think a couple of those stretch the definition a bit. And just for some bonus points, that 8th one has a fantasy setting anyways. Now let's see here. Dragon Quest II was released on January 26th. So if we assume it takes a month for the bosses at these game companies to realize that Dragon Quest II is a monster hit, that puts us at almost 6 months on the nose for when this flood starts. From this point on, RPGs are always going to be a major genre on the Famicom. Every game company is going to want to at least have one. And this initial group are the people who rushed in as soon as they realized Dragon Quest was big. And now I have to step back a little bit. From the early 80s, there were 2 computer RPGs that defined the genre: Wizardry and Ultima. The Famicom RPGs we've seen so far have mainly been Ultima inspired. Dragon Quest is very much the structure of Ultima, but replacing the combat with Wizardry's version. But here is the third game in the Ultima series, released without a number on the Famicom, though I believe that Ultima 2 and 3 had already come out for other Japanese computers. Ultima 1 wouldn't be ported to anything in Japan until 1990. They did give it a subtitle, though, Kyofu no Exodus, or The Horror of Exodus if you like. Ultima is the brainchild of amateur astronaut and cosplay enthusiast Richard Garriott. He's also infamous for inserting himself and all of his friends into the games. Garriott goes by Lord British, the ruler of the fantasy kingdom in the series. The principle for most of the series is to just give players a big open world, a goal with a handful of other side tasks, and then letting players explore it and make their own way. They are the first open world games. The downside to that was that it could be a little bit difficult to figure out what you needed to do. In fact, one of my very first online posts was asking for some help on beating Ultima 3 for my Commodore 64. The story of this game is that the villains of the first two games got together and had a kid. And now that kid has a castle in a lake of fire, on an island that can only be accessed by passing a sea serpent. And as brave heroes, you'll have to gather your strength and defeat this Exodus. The first thing you do once you press start is you have to choose which of 3 save slots you want. One of my favorite things about getting old Famicom games is checking out the save games from the people who owned it before. So let's take a look at what's in these slots. A level 1 party. A level 1 party. A level 1 party. Well, these players didn't make much progress. Let's see if I can outdo them. We need to create characters. You can manually create them, or you can have the game generate them for you. While you don't want to have the game generate them for you, it's convenient for a quick start. Plus, you can scroll through a lot of characters really fast. If I broke down all of the options Ultima gave you, this would be about a 30-minute video. So I'm sticking to a broad overview here. The most important things in your party are a pure class wizard and a pure class cleric. Their abilities are solely dependent upon their maximum intelligence and maximum wisdom scores, and those maximums depend on what race you choose. So you pretty much have to have a Bobbit wizard and a fuzzy cleric. Bobbits being their hobbit stand-in. If you don't go with those two, you won't be able to get to the upper levels of spells, and you're going to want the upper levels of spells. I guess this is a good point to bring up a few of the odd changes that occurred between the US version of Ultima Exodus and this Famicom port. One of those is fuzzies are called demons in this game, and instead of intelligence you have magical power, and instead of wisdom you have spiritual power. Specifically, Buddhist spiritual power. The party has to have 4 people. What you basically need are 2 meat sacks that are able to shoot ranged weapons. Dwarves have the highest maximum strength, so I put a dwarf fighter up front. And because having somebody to cast a couple utility spells, so I'm not wasting the spell points from the casters who can nuke things, I put an elf ranger in the final spot. Now you might be going, why not a thief? All defeated enemies in this game leave behind treasure chests, and the treasure chest could be trapped. So you'll want a thief to open those, right? I mean, it's not like there's a low-level spell that for the cost of taking 5 steps will outdo anything that the thief could do. Yeah, Ultima and Ultima 3 in particular have a bad case of D&D wizarditis. That unfortunate disease where spellcasters render everyone else in the party completely useless. It's especially bad when you consider that the only way to get experience is to be the person who delivers the killing blow to a monster. Now normally you'd think that would give the fighting classes a chance at low levels. Except that the rank 0 spell, so it costs 0 magic, for both wizards and clerics, completely destroy entire classes of monsters. wizards can completely pop goblins, orcs, and trolls, while clerics can just make the undead evaporate. The downside of those is that they can only be attempted once per combat, and every monster has a chance to avoid getting hit by it. But you did max out the intelligence for your wizard and the wisdom for your cleric when you created your characters, right? Because if you did that, the wizard and cleric are gaining a level about every 6 times that they cast that spell successfully, while your fighting guys have to individually kill about 30 monsters. When wandering the overworld, you'll see monsters walking around, and if you connect with one of those, you go to this tactical map to fight them. Monsters always start out pretty far away from you, so if your big wipe everybody out spells aren't going to work, having ranged weapons is something that you'll definitely want. For that, when we start the game, we're right in between the castle and the town has the shops that we need. So let's go there and go buy some weapons. Don't bother with the armor, you can't afford it. In fact, by the time that you can afford it, you can go talk to the right people in the correct town and get yourself the best armor in the game for free. While in this town, there's something else you should know about. This girl down here is an addition for the Famicom version. She's actually pop singer Noriko Hidaka, who was added into the game as a cross-promotion with her album. The next thing you need to know about is the status bar on the right-hand side of the screen. It pops up if you stand still for a moment. That's your entire party laid out there. Their name. The letters to the right of that give you some information about them. The first letter's their status. G for good, P for poison, D for dead. Then the next letter is if they're male or female. You don't get to choose that in this game. It's assigned based on your class. This actually has absolutely no bearing on anything in the game, so I'm not sure why they kept it, other than the original Ultima 3 let you have it because it was a character creation option. The next letter is the race. D for dwarf, E for elf, F for fuzzy, B for bobbit, H for human. There's no humans in my party because humans can't reach a 99 stat. The last letter is the class. Below that we have hit points and magic points. The F number below that is how much food they have. Food is always ticking down as you explore, and you'll have to do some grocery shopping from time to time to make sure you don't run out. Finally, you have your level. While you're walking around, pressing A brings up a menu. It's actually a 2-page menu, and you have to press select to go between pages. Talk is an obvious one. And below that is magic. Ultima will always let you cast a spell, even in a situation where it isn't appropriate, so it's very easy to waste some magic accidentally. But you get a magic point back every time you take a step, or take a turn in combat. Fight lets you start a fight with someone. And I mean anyone. Let's go beat up Lord British, huh? Well, obviously that doesn't work. But there is a way that you can kill him in this game. If you just beat up some random townspeople, the guards in town will come after you. And you have to be pretty high level to be able to take them out. Status shows you your party, and it's where you go to change out your equipment. Tools is where you go to use a special item you've picked up. And Give lets you transfer those around between characters. Get will pick up a chest from the ground. And the Stairs command will let you go up or down in a dungeon. On the second page, Food is for transferring food between characters. Gold does the same with gold. You can purchase horses to ride around in this game, and horses will let you manage that. Finally, Order will let you switch which positions your characters are in. You'll find dungeons dotted around the landscape. You can go down in those, and they're explored from a first-person view. The reason you need to explore them is that they're the key to gaining marks, which you have to accumulate in order to power up all the way. However, you're going to want to gain a few levels before you start exploring dungeons. The monsters are a step up there. There's a lot of little things to find in Ultima. You might spot moon gates if you're in the right spot at the right phase of the moon, or catch a glimpse of a town that's only there some of the time. There's pirate ships, and this whirlpool that will suck you away to another kingdom. hidden valleys that lock away secrets. The world isn't particularly large, but there's a lot to do, especially compared to previous RPGs we've seen on the Famicom. The big problem with Ultima is that it's a pretty bad port. They had to simplify the interface for the console, but they did it in pretty much the worst way possible, with options that don't really mean what they seem to. Why would you go to status to change your equipment, for example? Why are there 3 different methods of handing things between characters? Why leave the option to attack people in at all? And then there's the visual glitches. Between the flickering characters when they're all lined up in a row, which they will be because you'll walk in a straight line, and the occasional line that just shows up, this feels like it was shoved out the door to try to beat everybody else. The 6-month deadline hit and it had to ship. A lot of that was cleaned up in the US version, but it's still not a great port. Still, it was a bit easier to understand than the computer versions, where Garrett would have every key on the keyboard assigned to a unique function. This was a pretty big hit in Japan, too. There was even a comic adaptation of this game, which is currently stuck in customs for me. As for myself, though, I think I'm still going to stick to a computer version. There's just too many rough edges on the Famicom one.
I know I have a good game when I have to spend the first 15 minutes playing it, trying to figure out if my copy is broken. Did somebody write some kind of bad hack to my copy? Something that I've actually encountered on this project. Nope, turns out it was actually how the game was supposed to be. Topple Zip was originally a computer game, which isn't really a surprise considering it's by computer game developer BothTech. Although a major player in computers, BothTech only published 3 console games, all on the disk system, and we've already seen their first game for the disk system, Relics. So that was a bit of a warning sign for Topple Zip. Topple Zip is described as a racing adventure game, or at least that's what the packaging says. Personally, I don't see any racing at all here. This isn't a case where it was dropped between the computer versions and the Famicom disk system versions. The differences between those are relatively minor. My best guess is that it's more of a dodging game, similar to Zippy Race, and that's where they got the title from. But except for the fact that you have to get out of the way of things, it really doesn't play a lot like those games. This is clearly a shoot-'em-up with some adventure elements. In fact, it's very similar to Super Xevious and Super Star Force, though it's also much, much shorter. At least once you know what's going on. The goal of the game is that you're trying to win an airplane race. Yes, no one looks like airplanes, and no one is racing. And even at the ending, it doesn't really look like you're at a podium. And none of the adventure elements tie back to racing. But that is literally all of the story that you get. Topple Zip plays out across 8 areas, and these loop endlessly, taking about 20 seconds to complete a loop. You can make it scroll faster or slower by moving to the vertical edges of the screen. The 8 areas are linked through gates, so flying through one of those gates will take you to another zone. That's all simple enough, right? Okay, here's the entire path you follow to complete Topple Zip. Step 1, get to Area 5. You can do that by warping to Area 3, then Area 4, and 5. Step 2, earn 10,000 points. We'll come back to that in a minute. Step 3, pay 10,000 points to rescue this guy. Step 4, return to Area 3 and visit a shop there to get the only permanent upgrade in the game. Step 5, using that upgrade, access Area 7. To do this, you have to go back through Areas 4 and 5, and now the path to Area 6 and then 7 will be open. Step 6, go to a shop in Area 7 and get a key. Step 7, return to Area 2 by backtracking through those warp gates. And finally, Step 8, use the key to enter the warp gate to Area 8 and then complete the game by guessing which one of 6 locations randomly picked is the finish line. That is literally the entire game. I just gave you a walkthrough for it. Now, I only got about halfway through that while I was playing, and that's because there are a couple of annoying complications. But these complications are things that slow you down and make you repeat portions of the game over and over again, not things that are challenging to do. So how do you play this thing? Well, as you're flying around, hitting the A button will shoot, and hitting the B button will dive toward the ground. The dive move is used to enter things like the warp gates and shops, but the elevation isn't always at the ground or maximum height. For things like these square warp gates, you have to be transitioning between those heights in order to pass through them. Also, entering things is extremely precise, particularly when it comes to the elevation, and when you tap the B button, you dip down and pop right back up. So you're going to wind up missing the entrances a lot of times. And on later stages, those entrances are often a bit obfuscated, leading to you not really being sure if you missed the entrance or if there was nothing there. In the upper left, you have a fuel meter. This goes down anytime you're shot or collide with terrain or run into another ship. It goes down extremely slowly. So slowly that you'd pretty much have to be ramming things intentionally to watch it go down. If it runs out, then the next hit that you take will cause your ship to crash. You only have 1 life here, but continuing puts you back at the start of the area that you're in with 0 points. You recover fuel by flying into shops you'll find throughout the game, and here you'll pay 2,000 points to get 1 block of fuel. You can also pay 300 for a hint, and if you hit start at these locations, you can save your game. Saving your progress saves everything. The location, how many points you have, all of your power-ups including your temporary ones, everything. Power-ups are found in the little capsules that you'll find lying around. These capsules also get dropped by enemies, and yourself. If you shoot an enemy aircraft to stun it, and then ram it with your own ship, it'll drop a capsule. And the same thing works with you to make you drop some power-ups. In the disk system version of Topple Zip, you can only have 1 weapon power-up at a time, and collecting any other ones makes your current one go away. Collecting any power-up will get you points, and that is the primary way to increase your score. There are 2 items that improve your ship's maneuverability. The jars with the upward arrow are supposed to improve its speed, but there's only a couple of levels of that, so once you've collected a few, you won't notice any difference. And the top speed based on that is really slow. The other is a small ship that once you pick it up, you can swiftly move side to side. This is an item that has to drop from an enemy. There's also this item that gives you a bumper to prevent you from getting rammed from behind, and this microphone that will make you shout out phrases that don't really help. In terms of weapons, there's a 3-way shot, a homing shot, an explosive missile, balls that fly around your ship and intercept things, and mines that you can drop and which will continue scrolling forward at the same rate as the screen does. There are also a few harmful items for you to avoid, bottles of poison, and bombs that have a minus sign on them. They'll both stun you and cost you points. The most important item to find is the radar, because it will tell you what the destinations for all of the gates in your area are. These change every time you start playing, but they remain consistent for that play session. So if you warp from stage 1 to stage 2, and then accidentally warp back to stage 1, well, that same gate will take you to stage 2. The radar that you pick up as a drop from enemies is temporary, lasting only until the end of your current area, but the item you pick up after you rescue the ship gives you a permanent radar. And this is yet another one of those games that people in Japan just don't think about at all. The computer versions of Topple Zip are better known than the Famicom disk system version, and the computer versions are practically unknown. I just couldn't find anybody with anything to say on this game at all. And presumably that's because this one is really forgettable. The way that you can just ram through terrain and it really doesn't stop you doesn't help with this one. That's one of the things that makes the action in this game feel completely without consequence. Neither you nor your opponents can really affect each other. Well, except on a few of the later stages where you can actually shoot things down. But usually it's you getting stunned for a little while, or you've got your opponent stunned for a little while, and you just cycle like that endlessly. There isn't enough to do in Topple Zip. I broke down the entire path through this racing adventure, and I was generously padding the step count. Maybe the best thing about this game are the ship designs with the large sprites. Of course, those large sprites mean that there's very few things on the screen at any given moment. Topple Zip is just mediocre. There really isn't anything here to hold anyone's interest.
Oh, this is a big one. It's Famidaily's 8-bit-versary. 256 episodes in, and I haven't missed a day yet. Okay, there are days where I haven't completed an episode, but I make up for that with days where I do 2 episodes. We're also really close to the 1/4 mark of this project. Close enough that I don't even think I'm going to comment on it as I pass that one in a couple episodes' time. And the game for this final outing that could fit on the Famicom's memory bus? It's Esper Boukentai. Perhaps the strangest game on the Famicom. Esper Boukentai is a sequel to the arcade game Psychic 5. Both games feature a squad of 5 heroes, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, fighting their way through household objects that have been animated by Satan. No, seriously, that's the story. In Psychic 5, you start out by selecting which of these characters you want to use. But in Esper Boukentai, you always start out with the same one, and your first real goal in the game is to rescue the other 4. Esper Boukentai plays a lot like a platformer. The B button swings your hammer and the A button makes you jump, but there's a lot of other gameplay elements too. That said, the jumping is the only thing that people talk about with this game. In fact, I found a few people who said that it's the only thing that's interesting in the game. Some of the characters possess an enormously high jump. We're talking a dozen screens high. The areas that you explore in Esper Boukentai are freely scrolling in all 4 directions. They tend to be huge, and you have to have that jump to cover the distance. Your first character is Akio, and while he's supposed to be the average character of the group, he also has the second highest jump. So his platforming abilities are the most convenient usually. You could play 90% of the game as Akio and have it work out just fine. Mako is the second character you're going to find. She's the girl of the group, and really that's the only useful thing about her. She has the highest ability to hover. All the characters can slow their descent by pressing up while they're falling. Now you might think that's good for getting into narrow ledges or slowing their descent, but you can also just swing their hammer, and that stops their falling motion until the animation's complete, and you can go right into the next hammer swing, and you have control over your movement while you do this. So hovering is completely useless in this game. However, some of the monsters are only willing to hand things over to a girl. Yeah. Moving past today's example of bad game design with societal implications, the next character you'll find is Genta, the largest of the group. He has the highest defense and second highest attack, but the weakest jump, which makes him completely unable to get around in most areas. He does have a special ability. Genta can smash through certain walls and floors. They're not marked, but they are definitely required for progress. Now, Yuki is the tall member of the group who dresses in green, so naturally that means he has the highest jump. And I do mean highest. There's effectively no point in these giant areas that he can't reach. Finally, there's the old man Bunzo, who can barely jump, but has the highest attack of the group. If you hit select while you're running around, it'll bring up this screen that has the convenient map. You can also see what your current stats are, as well as change between any one of the members of your team. You can also activate your Esper power, which is this star that flies around you and can deflect things. Honestly, I found it to be just about useless. The status screen also shows you your experience points, because of course this game has RPG elements. And the experience scaling in Esper Boukentai is bad. You start at level 0, and level 1 is 100 points, level 2 is twice that, level 3 is twice that. Strangely appropriate for episode 256. The thing is, leveling up isn't a linear progression. It's not even an exponential progression. Level 5 is not 5 times stronger than level 1. It's 35 times stronger than level 1. And some doors in the game are locked by your level. On top of all that, enemies that give you more than 1 or 2 experience points are relatively rare. So what you'll definitely wind up doing is finding a spot with some enemies who give you decent experience for your level, and then sitting there and beating on them for a while. The power level differential is so absurd, you pretty much have to. You can't grind up as you go. Another thing preventing that is how enemies work in Esper Boukentai. Typically, only one enemy can be around at a time. And I don't mean on screen, I mean around. When you cross certain thresholds, then the enemy changes. And these aren't always obvious, so it results in enemies appearing and disappearing on you as you're going around. Touching an enemy doesn't hurt you, touching their shots does. And not every animated household object that you see is out to get you. You can hit start when you're overlapping one of them to talk to them, and that might get you some information, or you might be able to purchase some assistance. And in some cases, talking to them angers them and causes them to attack you. Keep an eye out for beds. When you talk to them, you could get a password, or you could pay to recover all of your energy. There's money in the game that you'll need to use to purchase these services, but it doesn't drop from enemies. It can only be found in treasure chests. And if you die, you lose half of your current money. So finite amount of cash, and you could easily lose all of it. What I'd recommend is just not touching the chests at all until you've leveled up a few times. You can freely explore the world of Esper Boukentai. The key to getting through rooms are these little statues. You have to touch them to unlock a door, and when you connect with one, you'll hear a chime if you're high enough level or have the correct item to open the door. I remember wanting to get Esper Boukentai because I really liked that jumping mechanic. And it is really good. The problem is everything else. The weird way you stick to ledges, the way that enemies sometimes get hit and sometimes don't, how everybody just keeps popping into and out of existence, how you have this big team, but hardly any reason to use anyone other than Akio, the way you have to hit a button to go through every line of text in the dialogue, and then sometimes that jumps to a yes and no question on you in the middle. If I had to pick a word to describe Esper Boukentai, it would be half-assed. There's a lot of stuff in here that could have been fun, but hardly anything is implemented well. There's a reason that the only thing anybody remembers about this game is that jumping. Here's our first proper Dragon Quest clone of this RPG block. Though it misses out on being the first Dragon Quest clone at all, since Data East's Heracles no Eiko is about 6 months old at this point. Indora no Hikari manages to introduce a few things that will become RPG cliches, but what it's really remembered for is some amazingly bad design choices. The title means Indra's Light, Indra being the Hindu god of the storm. That said, the game has a Western fantasy theme, so you won't see any other Hindu influences. The story is that the god Bar had his power source stolen by demons, and that power is Indra's Light. That's allowed the demons to run wild over the world. But as for you, you're just some guy in a small town who's looking for some medicine to help an ailing princess. I'm sure those two storylines won't meet up at some point. When you start the game, you have your choice of 3 save slots. In this case, 2 of them were occupied by people in the starting room, and the third one had made it all the way to level 8. I know it has to be a bad RPG when all the save slots are taken up by people who didn't want to play. But you'll also notice that this means that Indora no Hikari has a battery save. The RPG is really the genre to take advantage of them, and from this point on, RPGs that use passwords for continuing are going to become more and more rare. When you start out, you're by yourself in your house. Your dad gives you some equipment, your mom gives you some cash, and off you go for adventure. And by adventure, I mean grinding for about an hour. This game follows the standard loop: beat up monsters, get experience, get gold, get better equipment, beat up bigger monsters so you can get better stuff. As you walk around, you'll see little red blobs. Those are the monsters that could attack you. Colliding with one of them sets off a Dragon Quest style fight. You have magic points to start with, but no spells. You'll have to locate the person that'll teach you them. The first spell you get is a healing spell, just like Dragon Quest. In the town, you rest at inns to recover hit points. You can buy herbs from medicine shops, get better armor and weapons. And in a new twist, you can go to the church to save. Dragon Quest had you go to a king to get a password, but pretty soon everybody's going to have you go to church. The monster fights don't seem to be especially well balanced. The first monster I fought could only be defeated with a critical hit from the starting weapon. But that said, it was much stronger than the other monsters in the starting area. There is a hierarchy to monster damage. Monsters in the plain areas are weaker, monsters in the forest and desert are stronger. As you're exploring around, you'll see rocks, and similar to Zelda, you can search those to find items, which so far I've only found chests of gold. That said, there's 3 chests of gold in the immediate area around the starting town, and that's more than enough to improve your equipment. Your first real task is to find more party members. You can just find them in the correct town and hire them. And here's where Indora no Hikari's most infamous problem starts. Party members follow behind you. Slowly. The game is completely divided up into single-screen segments, and your other party members have to be close to you in order to follow you between screens. And in some towns and dungeons, the path doesn't allow for them to move very well, especially when you have more than one follower. So what usually happens is you're constantly herding your party members around. There is a spell to teleport party members to you, but it feels like that was a patch on top of a problem. The other weird quirk that the game's infamous for is that you have to learn the language of whatever countries you travel to. That sounds reasonable, but what it results in is going around in circles for a long time until you find just the right person to talk to. And talking to people's actually kind of tricky in Indora no Hikari. You don't do it via menu. If you just approach somebody face to face, they'll start talking. But if they're walking around, you can't approach them from the side or behind to start a conversation. You might have noticed that there's a ton of NPCs wandering around the towns in this game. It's something that exasperates all of the problems. I can say a couple nice things about Indora no Hikari. The music's great. It's really pleasant to listen to as you're grinding out all those levels. And visually, I think the game looks pretty good. Okay, the actual human beings aren't that great, but I think the landscapes and the monsters are drawn pretty well. Indora no Hikari is remembered as a pretty bad game, and I can't say I see that, though there's a good chance it's because I didn't really get party members. I could see myself going back to this one, though maybe when I have 2 more people following me around, and I keep losing track of them going into big fights solo, or having to backtrack around multiple screens looking for them. If I had to put up with that kind of frustration, maybe I'd wind up hating it too. But as it stands for me, all I'm seeing is a pretty solid Dragon Quest clone. Not groundbreaking, but also not bad.
Sometimes there just isn't that much to a game. Konami's Falchion is a very simple arcade-style shooter with no real power-ups, and not even a huge variety between stages. You might get the impression, based on the title, that Falchion is related to Gradius. They're both misspelled types of swords, after all, but there really isn't a connection here. The most you get is an occasional reference in a game that references a lot of Konami stuff. Falchion is clearly Konami's take on Space Harrier, or more appropriately, Galaxy Force, but Galaxy Force won't be released for another 6 months. You have the behind-the-ship view, you can freely move horizontally and vertically, and enemies rush at you from the distance. The second boss even has a little dragon that swoops back and forth. And I'll give Falchion this. It is amazing that Konami pulled off action that works this fast, and with details that scale this well on the Famicom. Even Sega struggles with getting their super scalar games to work nicely on consoles. So it's impressive that Konami got it to work this well. The plot of Falchion is that a giant alien spacecraft has entered the solar system and is headed towards Earth. Only one new experimental fighter can catch it, and it's up to them to blow up the whole thing. In terms of controls, the B button fires. There is no auto-fire for it, unless you happen to use an auto-fire controller, and the A button fires homing missiles, if you've collected any. As you're shooting your way through stages, sometimes these orbs with a P in them will show up and circle around the edge of the screen. The blue ones increase your speed, the red ones give you homing missiles. You start out with no homing missiles, and every red orb is 5. Getting hit by anything destroys your ship instantly, and you lose all of your homing missiles if that happens, so those are a real use 'em or lose 'em situation. At the end of every stage there's a boss, and it just circles the screen shooting at you, and you'll never guess where its weak spot is. It's the flashing circle. If you get a game over, you can continue, restarting from the beginning of that stage, but you only have one continue. After that, it's game over. There are 6 stages here, and Falchion is brutally difficult. Enemies move fast, they shoot fast, and it's hard to tell how far away anything is. Sometimes you'll just explode and have to figure out what hit you. It takes a while to get a feel for how far away something is just based on the sprite size. You are going to have to memorize enemy patterns if you want any chance of getting through this game. Unfortunately, the terrain itself is pretty generic, so I found it difficult to keep track of those things. There's just very little context clues. Now there might be a way to mitigate this, because Falchion is one of the few games that supports the Famicom 3D system. This is a set of LCD shutter glasses that Nintendo released, and they plug into the Famicom's expansion port. The lenses on the glasses are LCD, which go dark when voltage is applied to them, and each lens alternates 30 times a second. While you can see out of the left eye, you can't see out of the right eye, and vice versa. Meanwhile, the Famicom is displaying 2 different images, alternating those 60 times a second. So your left eye gets one set of images, while your right eye gets a different set of images. And you should be able to resolve this into a 3D image. So surely this would help me aim and dodge better. No, it didn't. The big issues here really seem to be that you have to be precisely lined up with the enemy ships to shoot them down, but they don't have to be lined up to ram into you. And at the same time, the Famicom sprite limits and the movement of large blocky ships prevents you from seeing some things as they're incoming. It also feels like objects stay in the distance very tiny for a while and then suddenly zoom up. And that just makes the timing of everything trickier. As a Konami game, Falchion does have a bit of a following in Japan, but it's mainly remembered for 2 things: the great background music and the absurd difficulty. I myself couldn't get past the 3rd stage while I was playing, and I was often getting obliterated on the 1st stage. Falchion is brutally hard, and really the only way to make any kind of progress is to memorize the game. It is very simple, and it feels like an arcade game from a few years before 1987. It's still worth checking out Falchion for the technical accomplishment. Just be aware that you'll get blown up awfully fast.
Haja no Fuin is a bit of an unusual one. It's an RPG, alright, but it doesn't quite fit in the same mold that we've been seeing. There's a few distinctive things about it. First, unlike 90% of the RPGs we're going to see, this one has been localized to the US. It has a release on the Sega Master System, though that version has considerable differences. Haja no Fun started as a computer game, and is remembered for exactly two things. That's the final boss on the cover, and yes, she is topless in the game as well. If you go searching for this game on the Japanese side of the web, you'll find plenty of results, and they'll all be pictures of her. So you might not want to do that at work. A fun thing about this game is that the Famicom version came with a metal miniature and a cloth map. The miniature had a bad tendency to get lost, and so copies with it can be a little bit pricey, but you can get a copy with just the map for about $15. The map's actually pretty useful for the game too. The grid squares on it are all one step. Not all features of the game world are on the map too. You'll find towns and castles that aren't represented. There's a lot of interestingly named regions on the map too. The plains you start on are called Phosphorus. The bay right below them is called Gorgon. There's a lake called Kallipolis, and a valley called Kerberos. It's definitely a situation of picking out Greek words and just putting them down on a map. The title of the game means Haja's seal, and that's been broken at the start of the game. That's letting monsters flood into the world, and so Argus is selected to go forth and get the evil seal so that they can close up the worlds again. The game plops you down in the lower left-hand corner of the map with a sword, armor, and 10,000 gold. The rest is up to you. While you're exploring on the map, you get a view of the surrounding area, and you can see a castle or town or a person you might encounter in the distance. Press A when you see one to go to it. Occasionally, if the figure is a monster, it will just attack you. But that's actually pretty uncommon. So this is going to be a common statement for me as I go over these RPGs, but Haja no Fuin is really grindy. You'll need to grind for about half an hour before you can leave the starting area, and then you'll have to grind for about 45 minutes to move on to the next spot after that. I know from screenshots that you eventually pick up companions, but I was still hours away from getting those based on the guide I was following. Let's walk through an encounter. We've just spotted somebody, so let's hit A to bring it up. First thing to work out is if they're friendly or hostile. Once you've encountered things a few times, you'll have a good idea. If it's a friendly human, you could talk to them, or you could threaten them. If you threaten somebody, they'll remember it later, too. You can try talking to everybody, but some things will attack you. The number below the characters that you encounter are their hit points. And the status area at the bottom of the screen shows the condition of your weapons and armor in their color, then your hit points, and your experience points. If you don't think you can take them, run is the top option, though they might get a swipe in at you too. The bottom option is how you attack, and you also have to select which character you want to attack with. Naturally, there's only one option there for a while. You'll rush the enemy, bounce off them, and you'll both take a bit of damage. When you defeat a monster, you only get fame. But if you defeat a human being, you'll get a little bit of money. And the economy in this game is a little bit odd. If you don't pick up on a couple key tricks, you're probably going to wind up broke. First, these big bald guys, you can freely attack them, and they carry a lot of cash. These swordsmen are also bad guys, but they don't carry very much cash on them. A second tip is that it costs $1,500 to get 10 potions that will heal you to full health. It costs you about 2 gold per hit point that you're going to heal. So if you can afford to heal by potions, it's a little bit more efficient. And speaking of healing, let's talk about towns. When you go into a town, the first option you have is to speak with the Elder. He'll demand 500 gold to fill you in on something that's happening in the area. Below that is the Armorer. I'll come back to him in a moment. Then there's the Healer.
where you can pay to get healed immediately or buy some potions. And then the blacksmith. Some towns also have a bar where you can pick up tips. Now every time that you hit something or get hit, your equipment degrades. The blacksmith can repair your sword, but your armor just eventually decays to nothing. So you'll have to buy replacements from time to time. All of these services are pretty expensive, and money is actually relatively rare, so it's going to feel like you're not making a whole lot of progress financially. While you're exploring the world, there's a couple things to be aware of. Weaker monsters tend to appear in the grassy areas, then it's a step up for the forest and deserts, and another step up for the mountains. You can swim, but you lose health for every step you take in a square of water, and you could also get swept away by a current. Some of the castles you encounter will only have a monster in them, and there's a few spots where the monsters are annoyingly persistent. You can press select from the map screen, and that brings up a very convenient shorthand status screen that shows you what your reputation is and the condition of all of your equipment. You can also press B to bring up a menu. There's an option for goods that you have, which I never reached in the game. You can use one of your potions from here, and you can also go to save your game, and saving in this case means password. You can do that anytime that you're not in a square with an encounter. If you've been wondering why the fairy's there, it's who provides you the background information on what's happening. Although it never says,
"Hey, listen!"
In Japan, Haja no Fuin seems to have a bit of a mixed reputation. People like the freeform exploration style of game, but found it to be extremely grindy. And the dungeons that you find are all as large as the overworld, though apparently the final dungeon level has a special thing about it. If you map it out, it's a drawing of the final boss. And yes, she's naked. I think I have to agree with the general assessment. There's a lot of clever ideas for an early RPG here, and they just get bogged down by the need to sit there and grind for about 4 hours. That said, I could see myself coming back to this one. I kinda like the weirdness, and I could always do something else as I grind. We haven't had a lot of luck with Taito's games that have battery saves so far. Mirai Shinwa Jarvis was god-awful, and Kyonshis 2 wasn't any better. Two games that would go pretty near the bottom if we were listing in order of quality. Taito's third attempt at this, Minelvaton Saga, also isn't particularly well known. On the other hand, it has a reputation as a cult game in Japan. One that doesn't quite have the reputation of the big 1-2 punch of the biggest RPG franchises coming up in about 2 months, but still pretty well liked by the people who do remember it. As the story in Minelvaton Saga begins, the player is informed by their dying father that they are in fact a lost prince. You go to the local king for help and he says, "Do you know how many lost princes we get in here? Go get a crown and then we'll talk." So you have to go get yourself a crown. The story in this game is by novelist Yuto Ramon, who's best known for a book called Gidleen, which was turned into a Super Famicom RPG. As you're walking around, you can hit A to bring up the menu, and this one's actually pretty simple. You've got generic items. That'll be for usable stuff like items to warp you out of dungeons. The next option is the important one, potions. That's going to be your party's primary method of healing, so you're going to be chugging a lot of them. Below that in the menu is magic. You don't have any, but you can recruit party members who do. Then there's relics, which are the key items in the game, like that crown you have to get. Equipment follows that, but you won't find any equipment to change to until after you complete the first dungeon. Equipment is also missing one very important thing.
We'll get to that when we talk about the battle menu. Data brings up your current status, and it's a 4-page deep menu, so you'll have to hit A multiple times to show it all. The first page shows your current HP, XP, and level. The second page is a party overview. The third page shows your stats, which are attack, defense, and speed. And all of those are important in this game. We'll talk about that when we get to combat. Finally, there's a page to show you mercenaries. And mercenaries are actually the big thing that people like in Minelvaton Saga. But I didn't reach them in my playthrough. Some towns have guilds where you can hire certain specific characters to join your group. And rather than being in your party, they form up a second party altogether. You can switch to that party and they'll fight automatically. The big catch with mercenaries is, if they die forever. They can't be revived. The combat system in Minelvaton Saga is a bit different. When you encounter an enemy, you go to a top-down view of the battlefield. You only control your own character. Once you have party members, they'll do their own thing. And basically, you just have to run up to the enemies and push into them. It's very similar to Ease, which was brand new at that time. How often you attack is determined by your speed, and then there's an attack roll that occurs and a defense roll, so there is a bit of randomness in how the battles will turn out. You can see the enemy's hit points on the right-hand side, while your own are tracked down below. Bumping into enemies isn't the only way to do damage. You can press the B button to fire a bullet, if you've purchased them. They're actually relatively cheap, especially if you buy them in bundles, but they do have to be equipped before you can use them. When you press the A button during combat, it brings up a menu. At the top, you've got potions again. The default one heals about 500 hit points, and you have 800 hit points to start with. The second option in combat is what shot you're going to take. This is how you equip what bullet you fire when you press B. And below that is magic. If you happen to have a party, you can instruct them on what spells you want them to use. The zero-cost spell is the magic bullet, so you'll probably want to set your party members to do that by default. Next, if there's special items to use, you can find them there. You can also choose to talk to enemies. Generally speaking, they all just growl or grunt. Bosses can have conversations, but if they do, it always shows it to you anyways. Running away is a bit unusual in this game. You can always run away from a battle. That includes the final boss. There's no roll for success, or time delay on escaping, you just do it. So you absolutely could just walk straight to the end of something, running away from all the enemies in between. What you'll find though is that there are key enemies on the map that block your way until they're defeated, and you will have to be strong enough to defeat them. Finally, you can control which party members you have in combat, and even send away ones that might be too injured to continue. Leveling up in Minelvaton Saga is fast. It's also done without fanfare. I got to level 14 before I completed the first dungeon, and I was 16 at the point when I decided to quit. Leveling that fast does come with a trade-off though. Your stats are increasing pretty slowly, so you will need to increase your level about 10 times before you're ready to complete that first dungeon. One tip to help you if you encounter something that you're under-leveled for: the bullets do massive damage, and it's at little risk to you. 10 bullets cost about 150 gold, and 10 well-placed lucky shots could easily wipe out an enemy force. You get tons of gold in this game, so buy those stacks of potions and bullets and use them. There are a few sequels to this game. The Silva Saga series on the Super Famicom is both a tongue twister and a continuation. However, those games are much more straightforward Dragon Quest clones. As for Minelvaton Saga, yeah, this one was pretty good. I liked that in the hour and a half I played, I was able to complete one dungeon and get part of the way through a second. The encounter rate is crazy high, but you can run away from everything. Its biggest downside is that when you level up, you don't feel like you're getting that much stronger.
But beyond that, this is a game I want to explore more in depth. We live in an era of relatively stable hardware platforms. Regardless of form factor, there isn't much difference between any active video game console. You can argue about specs, but a game for one platform will play pretty much the same as that same game released on another platform. This wasn't true in the 1980s. Back then, every platform had wildly different hardware, and you weren't building your games on engines that trivialized porting. So when a game got ported between platforms, decisions that were made for the original version were often reflected on other platforms, even when they weren't really appropriate. I'm bringing this up because Youkai Yashiki is really obviously an MSX game. Casio created the original Youkai Yashiki, releasing it about a year before the disk system version. That original MSX version shares some of the same concepts, but the stages are completely different, and so are some of the bosses. The disk system version also added a lot more enemies and power-ups, so really you could consider this to be kind of a pseudo-sequel to the MSX version. The plot of the game is that on the edge of town there was a yokai mansion, where all of the monsters in Japan had been sealed up. You and your girlfriend snuck in there and accidentally released the monsters, so now you have to put things right and rescue your girlfriend. There are 5 stages in Youkai Yashiki, and they follow the same fundamental structure. Collect 5 talismans, and then enter the proper location to confront the boss. There's no scrolling here, every screen stands on its own, and naturally the monsters are restored if you exit a screen and then come back. An annoying aspect of this game is that the map is extra confusing. A lot of screens are duplicated, and a lot of them are linked in ways that don't make any kind of linear sense. Not even an infinitely looping section. Fortunately, there is a map. You can access it by hitting the select button. Also, you can't really tell which ways you can exit unless you bump up against the edge of the screen. And you can't enter the boss's room until you find all 5 talismans, so once you've done that, you're basically going back through the whole stage bumping up against walls until you find the new path that opened. The talismans are also often positioned where you only have one shot at getting them, and if you didn't make the jump or pick the wrong path, then you have to loop back through the whole stage in order to get another shot at it. An important navigational trick to be aware of are the wells, some of which burst into flames periodically. You can stand on these and press down to warp between wells, though which one you come out of is random, and it might burst into flames immediately after you come out. There are places where you have to use the well to get out of the area, but for the most part you're probably going to want to avoid using them. As you're playing, A jumps and B shoots. Holding down up and hitting A will give you a little bit floatier of a jump, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but there's spots where low ceilings will send you down, unless you take advantage of that tiny boost that holding down up gives you. Your weapon is a flashlight, and the strength of the flashlight depends on how many batteries you have. Fortunately, those don't go down with use. You can mash the B button and blast all of the yokai that you want. Unfortunately, the batteries are also your life bar, so as you get hit, your attacks become much worse. First, the batteries run down, going empty, and then if you get hit after that, you lose some of your maximum battery gauge. At the start of the game, you have 3 empty battery gauges, and you gain charge by defeating these spirit balls. On later stages, they appear as regular enemies throughout the area, and they basically become the easiest way of restoring your health. You can also find rice balls laying around, and you can refill your entire battery gauge by kneeling in front of one of these statues when you have a rice ball. Or at least that's what the manual says. I couldn't get it to work. I suspect this is a situation where it requires pixel-perfect placement. The ladders and ropes have a similar problem, so it might not be as convenient to use as you'd like. You can also find items by blasting open light sources, like lamps. You could find a candle which will restore a small amount of energy, or a battery that will increase your maximum battery gauge. The items that you get from light sources are random, and light sources don't respawn when you leave the screen and come back. Except on some stages they do respawn. There isn't a lot of consistency in Youkai Yashiki. There is a maximum length for the battery gauge, and that increases as you progress. So on stage 1 you have a maximum length of 4, on stage 2 that increases to 5, and so on. Other items that you can find in the light sources are points, 2 different ways of becoming invincible, and an item that lets you do more damage for about 5 seconds. When it comes time to go fight the boss, you want your battery gauge to be at its maximum. Not for the extra health, but because you're going to need the extra range. The bosses tend to screen themselves with their attacks, and unless you have enough range to hit them, you're going to have a really difficult time getting close. You only have 1 life in Youkai Yashiki, but you do get infinite continues. Though when you continue, you do go back to having a completely empty battery gauge, and that means that any hit will permanently weaken you. You'll have to explore and avoid enemies until you can find a way to refill your gauge. Trying to find people who had memories of playing Youkai Yashiki, almost everything I could find was about the MSX version, which people apparently liked a lot. The Famicom Disk System version, on the other hand, just gets absolutely no attention. The very few people I could find who had anything to say at all mentioned that they found the maps to be incredibly confusing. My own feelings on Youkai Yashiki are that it's not a great game, but it is a decent attempt, especially for 1987. Mechanically, I feel like its biggest flaw isn't the confusing level layout, it's the way that your health bar and flashlight strength are the same meter. It winds up forcing you to grind for health instead of playing naturally. Youkai Yashiki is a perfectly fine, perfectly average game for the Famicom Disk System. It's the kind of thing that if you had it in 1987, you'd play it, but then you'd probably want to rewrite it with something actually good. And thinking about it that way, maybe that's why people don't really remember this one.
As I work my way through these RPGs, I'm trying to find ways to highlight the unique mechanics of each of them. That's not always easy, since a lot of them hide their deeper mechanics until you're several hours in, and I just don't have enough time to explore those properly, given my format. With Momotaro Densetsu, I've got a different problem. The game mechanics here are literally Dragon Quest. So are a lot of other aspects of this game. This is the most direct copy of Dragon Quest that we have seen so far on the Famicom. How direct is the copy? Well, the designer of Momotaro Densetsu is Akira Tsukuma, Yuji Hoри's college buddy. And it was Horii who convinced his friend to go into the game industry. And just like with Dragon Quest, they got a comic illustrator to do the monster designs. Though someone with a lot less clout than Akira Toriyama. Though Tsukuma had written books with Toriyama. Those monsters were created by Takayuki Doi. He's best known for illustrating the Dragon Quest manual. One of the things that Momotaro Densetsu is known for is being the first of these RPGs to push away from a Western, pseudo-medieval fantasy theme. The Momotaro of the title is one of the classic Japanese fairy tales. The introduction to the game goes over the basics. An old couple with no children find a giant peach in a river, and when they try to cut it open, inside is baby Momotaro trying to get my channel banned. As he starts to grow up, Momotaro decides that he needs to do something about the Oni that are ravaging the countryside, and so he sets off to go attack their island fortress. Along the way, he picks up companions in the form of a dog, monkey, and bird, but I didn't make it far enough in the game to encounter them. Those of you who are watching the video instead of listening to it while doing something else might have noticed a few anachronisms during that opening sequence. Momotaro Densetsu is a game with a very light-hearted tone. Right down to how when you finish a battle, you don't kill the monsters, you just defeat them. All of the creatures that attack you talk to you, and most of them are just saying something goofy. You can even talk to this pile of poop in the middle of a field. That has to be a first for RPGs. But mechanically, Momotaro Densetsu is identical to Dragon Quest. You have the same random battles to grind up experience and loot, done in the exact same style as Dragon Quest, where your options are just fight, cast spells, use items, or run away. You grind up the cash to buy some more equipment in town. Though equipment isn't actually equipped in this game, you have to use it to apply it to yourself, and you never get back the old equipment that you had been using. Also, your armor are things like headbands, sandals, and flags. No helmets or chest pieces here. Before you set out for Oni Island, you need to get some help from wizards around the country. They'll tell you spells if you can defeat them. This first one has the healing spell, and while he doesn't have many hit points, he's constantly healing himself back to full as you fight. It's basically random if he'll let you get the 4 consecutive rounds that you need with no healing. One of the odder quirks is the status bar at the top of the screen. They use kanji to identify what they are, and it's mind, skill, and body, which in other games would correspond to XP, MP, and HP. The layout of towns should be familiar to you by this point. You've got the inn where you can stay to recover your hit points, a weapons shop where you can purchase new equipment, and a tea house where you buy healing items. If you do have items that you want to sell, you have to sell them to the pawn shop. It's its own building. And when you're ready to save, you go to this big house where you meet the chief, and he'll tell you how much experience you need for the next level, as well as give you the password. The initial grind in Momotaro Densetsu is extremely slow. To fully equip yourself takes about 300 yen. Enemies drop about 1 or 2 yen. And don't forget you need some of that money for hotels. It does improve once you get out of the starting area, but the enemy scaling after the starting area is odd. The stronger enemies do 2 or 3 hit points of damage to you even with better armor, but the dog does 15 points of damage to you. There's also this version of the mouse, which can freeze you in your tracks. With only one character, there's no way really to break out of it except to wait. There's one more weird mechanic I should mention. Every 2 hours that you're playing the game, Momotaro ages a year. That changes the graphics that are used to display him at certain points. The other thing that changes is that if you age too much, you can't go into the women's baths. Yeah, I can't say I feel bad about not being able to show that off. Momotaro might be the single largest game series that it never got released in the US. There's multiple sequels and remakes to this game. In fact, a sequel to this game is the very last Famicom RPG. That said, the real volume of games in the Momotaro series come from the spin-off game. And that's such an enormous topic, I think I'll save it for when we get to that game. Momotaro Densetsu is a beloved game in Japan, but I'm not really feeling it. It's perfectly competent. There's nothing especially egregious about it compared to other Famicom RPGs, but it's also just Dragon Quest. If I want to play Dragon Quest, I've got 4 of those games on the Famicom. We're going to see a lot of games that do nothing more than copy Dragon Quest, and Momotaro Densetsu is a bit better made than some of those. But I can't recommend it unless you absolutely have to have an 8-bit RPG.
At this point, Hoshiomiru Hito is less of a game and more of a meme. When I started collecting Famicom games, you couldn't give away copies of it. But over the past 5 years or so, its reputation as the worst Famicom RPG reached the point where people were going out and buying copies. So now if you want a Hoshiomiru Hito cart, it'll cost you about $25. The nicest thing I can say about Hoshiomiru Hito is that the title can translate to stargazers. Now you might think that doesn't sound like a very positive thing to talk about, but that is the best thing I can say about the game. Hoshiomiru Hito was so bad, it was used as punishment in the Famitsu offices whenever an employee misbehaved. Hoshiomiru Hito is so bad, I struggle to think of a single system in this game that isn't broken in some way. And none of it's broken in a fun way. This is a game that solely exists to inflict pain. Only the most extreme of masochists would even attempt to complete it. The story of the game is that in the future, a giant space city was completely controlled by an AI, but the AI couldn't control espers, and so it decided to hunt them all down. Your character, Minami, is one of those espers. You start the game without equipment or money, one square to the left of the starting town. Where's the starting town? Oh, it's right there, don't you see it? The manual tells us that the town is invisible because of a psychic barrier, but no other town or location in the game has this issue. The next obvious problem you're going to come across is that you move slow. Your walking speed is maybe a quarter of what would be reasonable. It takes forever to get anywhere in the game. Let's go ahead and bring up our status menu, and here's another obvious problem, though it's one that you might not notice. All of the words in the game are spelled in hiragana, the syllabic character set in Japanese that's used for all Japanese words. Loanwords, on the other hand, are typically written with katakana. Naturally, a sci-fi RPG has a lot of loanwords in it, like gold, for some reason, and ray gun, and rocket launcher. And all of these are written in hiragana rather than katakana, which means that the game is misspelling a lot of its text. In the first town, you can buy some medicine, you can buy equipment, but right now we don't have any money. Fortunately, you can get healed by this person, all the way down here. If you have a party, you have to heal each member individually. She doesn't do it for everybody. Okay, so let's go get into a fight. We're at level 0 right now, and in that case, we get automatically killed by about 70% of the encounters. They just do too much damage to you. There is no option to run away, either. All you can do is fight them, even though it's hopeless. If you die, you go back to the main menu. There's no teleporting to your last rested location, or anything like that. So we've defeated an enemy. Now that we've successfully completed a fight, let's go back and heal, and we'll go to the save option in the ESP menu. That gives you a password. And right now you can see, it's all nice, neat Latin alphabet. Well, mostly Latin alphabet. We'll go back out and fight, and naturally we die again. But this time we have a password. So let's start entering it. You have to scroll up and down through all of the characters, but it's the entire Latin alphabet, the copyright symbol, all of the hiragana characters, and all of the katakana characters, even though katakana is not used in the game. There's over 100 characters in all that you have to scroll through when you're entering passwords. And remember, passwords are the only way that you can continue. You know the password's really evil because it includes both number 0 and the letter O. The manual actually has a little section helping players tell them apart. Alright, back in the game. I think after that fight we should have enough cash to buy something. But let's bring up the menu and discover that when you continue, you lose all your gold. That's right, if you need to grind up cash to buy equipment, you have to earn it all in one go. In combat, you pretty much just have to choose to hit people over and over again. You will get an Esper power, but it costs you your own hit points to use, and it's not particularly effective on enemies. That number below my portrait at the bottom is my hit points, but it cuts off the ones digit,
So here I have hundreds of hit points, even though it's only showing 2 digits. And the really fun part about the combat system is that sometimes you just get no experience or gold after you win. No reason for it, it just happens. Okay, after beating up some of these clowns for a while, I'm finally strong enough to survive a little bit in the wilderness, so let's walk to the next town. There it is. We'll go in and we'll check it out. They have a few stores here, nothing too much. Time to move on. And we're right back to the starting town. Yes, anytime you exit something in Hoshiomiru Hito, you wind up back at the starting town. And that's as far as I got with the game. The pitiful state that you start out in, and being forced to re-enter a password constantly really ate up the time. One of my goals with this project is that these videos should have enough information that somebody else could pick up the game and play it if they wanted to. I'm not doing that for Hoshiomiru Hito. This game doesn't deserve it. I didn't even get into fun things like how you have to buy passes to open certain doors to go through, but you could lock yourself inside because you need a pass to go both in and out. Or how in some dungeons the walls don't exist. It's really obvious that Hoshiomiru Hito was released in a completely unfinished state. Not that I think any amount of polish would have made it a good game, but perhaps they could have raised it above the level of unplayable. Is Hoshiomiru Hito the worst Famicom RPG? Yes, absolutely. Nothing else even comes close. Is it the worst Famicom game? That one's more iffy. I have a game I dislike worse, and there's perhaps 4 or 5 other games that are similar disasters that are barely functional, but there's no way it's not in the bottom 5. This is a game that should not exist. We're hopping back in time for the third and final port of a Williams arcade game by HAL. But Joust is kind of special. Joust is the game that caused all of these ports. Satoru Iwata wrote it to demonstrate that he could program for the Famicom, and Nintendo used it, as well as the other ports that HAL made of Atari games, to try to sell Atari on distributing the Famicom in the United States. Of course, Atari passed since they had their own game systems they were working on, and the rest is history. The arcade game Joust is one of my favorites of all time. And so that raises the immediate question, is Famicom Joust a reasonable port of the arcade? And the answer is, kinda. It does a lot right, gets a few things wrong, and the overall result is not bad. In Joust, you're a knight on an ostrich, and your goal is to defeat waves of enemies who are similarly riding around on ostriches. The ostrich can propel itself up into the air, but not particularly well. So every time you hit the A button, you flap your wings once. And you have to hit it repeatedly to carry yourself up into the air. When you and an enemy collide, whoever's lance is higher wins. If they're equal, you just bounce off. Otherwise, the loser is popped. For you, that means losing a life. For the enemies, that means being reduced to an egg. If you let the egg sit around for a while, it'll hatch into a soldier, and his ostrich comes out to pick him up. So what you need to do is run over and collect the eggs, or you can still get the enemy after they hatch, as long as they haven't gotten back on their bird. Both you and the enemy spawn in from these glowing panels on the ground, and one advantage that you have is that you spawn in before the enemies do. So you can position yourself to take advantage of how they're coming in. If you're defeated, you respawn at one of those glowing panels, and you're invincible until you move or flap. The game starts out with 4 platforms, plus the ground, and a covering for some lava. After a couple rounds, the lava covering burns away, and from that point on, if you fly too close to the lava, you could get snatched by a hand that tries to drag you down. You can still escape it by flapping a lot.
enemies can get caught by the hand as well, and that's a good opportunity to pick them off. As time passes, other platforms will vanish as well. Eventually, it gets to the point that just the ground is left. On later stages, after a little while, a pterodactyl appears. The pterodactyl will try to run you down, and it goes away if you get defeated. There is a way to defeat the pterodactyl, though. If you collide with it just right so that your lance hits the tip of its nose, then the pterodactyl is destroyed instead of you. Some of the stages are egg stages, where all of the enemies start out in the eggs rather than emerging from the glowing spots. It's not too difficult to collect all of the eggs before they hatch in those stages. Comparing Famicom Joust to the arcade version, your bird in Famicom Joust has a lot more momentum. It's tougher to reverse direction and respond to the enemy's movements. The other big difference, though, is that the enemy AI is a lot simpler. It's not nearly as aggressive about going after you as the arcade game is. This is actually a little bit of a problem because they have a bad tendency to fly up to the top of the screen and stay there. The US version of Joust for the NES revamped the graphics for the game, making them more in line with the arcade version. I guess being able to go back and revisit a 4-year-old game at that point has its advantages. Joust is a solid arcade port, but it's also something else. This is the last hurrah for the classic arcade game on the Famicom. Stargate, Millipede, and Joust were the style of games that the Famicom was built to be able to play. This is what the Famicom was in 1983 and 1984. It's not the end of score attack games, of course, but the genre is morphing into something else. We won't see that, however, until the late 1998. One of the nicer things about this project is that I'm often getting to go back and play games that I tried, thought were kind of neat, but had to set aside for other things. Romancia is one of those games, and I always intended to get back to it. Unfortunately, playing it with a guide so that I knew where to go has revealed the flaws in Romancia for me. When I was poking around trying to figure things out, it seemed like there could be a rich game there. But now coming into it with a bit more knowledge, I can see that it's one of the worst action-adventure games we've seen so far. Romancia was a computer game. Specifically, it was Dragon Slayer 3. Namco released Dragon Slayer 4 on the Famicom about 3 months before this, and we're going to have the release of Dragon Slayer 2 on the Famicom about 2 weeks after the release of this game, or about 4 episodes from now. The game is very loosely based on the novel, and I'm going to apologize here because my French is even worse than my Japanese. Voyage merveilleux du prince Fanfredin dans la Romancia. I couldn't find an English translation of this 18th century French novel. Though from the descriptions I could find, I think they only took names from it. The story of the game is that Prince Fanfredin is just exploring the world and comes across a set of kingdoms that are in trouble. The princess of Romancia has been kidnapped, and disease is spreading throughout the land. The game itself is a side-scrolling action-adventure game, though the action and adventure do seem to be very separated. You'll have to go through the action segment of passing through this forest and defeating a boss, and then you enter the Kingdom of Romancia, where you have to do adventure things for quite a while, and then you go back and do some action again, and so on. The game originally had the subtitle of Dragon Slayer Jr., but that seems to refer to how the interface was simplified a bit. Despite that, the game is known for being overwhelmingly difficult. In fact, some ads for the computer versions called it very cute and 100% difficult. But Romancia didn't come by that difficulty fairly. It's difficult because everything is obscured, it's very easy to put your game in an unwinnable state, and there is no way to continue. The one blessing here is that the game is extremely short. It takes about 45 minutes to complete when you know what you're doing. However, about 30 minutes of that are backtracking. Romancia is not a large game, and so it's padded like crazy. Let's take your first major task when you get to town, for example. There's a lot of sick people in town, and they need medicine. You can get medicine at the church, which is at the far end of town. You then have to take that medicine to each individual person, hand over the medicine, walk back to the church, and repeat. You also need to dump some medicine in the town well to purify the water. So you have to make this round trip 4 times to get everything. And for added bonuses about how annoying Romancia can be, the only way to talk to sick people is to stand a bit away from their head, not next to them like you do for everyone else. And you have to have the medicine selected as your active object, and talk to them to get them to take it. If you press the A button, which is Use Item, then you use the medicine on yourself instead. And since there's a limited amount of medicine, and you have to get enough karma by healing people, if you do press A, you've just ruined your game. You start out with 1 hit point and no attack points. The very first thing you do is talk to these 2 gentlemen, and they'll restore you to 20 hit points and 15 attack points. Those attack points aren't really that useful. The B button swings the sword, and holding down the B button throws the sword at the cost of 1 attack point. The only place where I found it to be really effective is against the boss. Since A uses the item you have selected, and B attacks, that means you have to press up to jump. You have a double jump in Romancia, and it is probably the worst double jump ever. At the very top of your jump, you have to release and press jump again. If you don't do a full height jump, you can't double jump. Miss that 1 frame where you're at the top of the jump, you don't get your double jump. It is so tricky to perform the double jump in this game that if you were just told that it existed and then tried to do it, you would think that they were lying to you. And the worst part about that double jump is that it's required in several points. So we're fighting our way through the forest now, and there's a ruin that blocks your path, but you can't get into it until you defeat enough guys outside of it. Once that happens, this blue sphere shows up. It automatically drops on you, and once you have it, you can go forward. While you're fighting monsters, they'll sometimes drop sword or heart icons to increase those stats, but you can hit those pickups and destroy them. I don't even know why they would include that feature. Okay, so we're through the forest, and now we're at this lake with the jumping fish. You have to jump across the clouds, and if you fall in, the only way you're getting out is if a fish pushes you out. And just past that, we have this boss. It's actually not that tough to beat, especially if you're throwing swords. If it does start hurting you, you can hit the scales it launches to get some additional hearts and swords. That brings us to town, and I've already described the Sick People quest. Helping them earns you karma. That's this ring in the corner. You need good karma so that you'll go to heaven. And I'm not being metaphorical there. As you wander around town, you'll collect a few key items, like a robe and a soul. And then you talk to this guy who will kill you, and if you have everything that you need, you'll fly up to heaven. In heaven you can get some items blessed, and earn some magic points. The other 2 stats in the lower right hand corner are kind of related. You have gold, but there isn't much you can buy with it, except for defense points. Those you can purchase for 2 gold each from this guy, or you can jump through his wall and buy them for 1 gold each from his brother. There are a lot of hidden walls and things that you just have to walk through in Romancia. This passageway to get down to the ferry is one of the more annoying ones. With all the equipment you get, you can go east out of town, and here you can have these guys complete a bridge for you. Though, looking at it, I'm wondering if you could double jump over it, assuming you could double jump successfully. The completed bridge will link you to the neighboring kingdom, where everybody's been turned into pigs. Killing the pigs costs you karma. And like I said, you need the karma. So if you're trying to figure out what's going on here, you've just ruined your game. Instead, you have to use blessed water to kill them kindly, I guess? They still die, it just gains you karma. And that's about as far as I got in Romancia. It's a short game, but if you play it, you have to follow a guide exactly, to the letter, and I'd advise reading ahead. There's a lot of pitfalls that you'll just stumble into because you don't know what's going on. And really, they're the kind of thing that make Romancia not that much fun. When you see how narrow the path is for you to follow in order to complete the game, any kind of experimentation or tinkering basically makes you have to start over. And that's not fun. On top of that, the game is dragged out. Even in the hour that I was playing, I wound up having to repeat things a lot. I had wanted to go back to Romancia, but this return has made me not want to go back again. Side Pocket is one of the games that gives 8-bit pool a bad name. Okay, there's really only one game that justifies 8-bit video game pool, but still, Side Pocket is a pretty bad implementation of pool. Originally, it was a Data East arcade game, but it's one of the Data East games that Namco released for some reason. However, this is also the first time that we're seeing a game that was released in the US before it was released in Japan. And Data East released Side Pocket themselves in the US. Side Pocket offers 3 game modes: Pocket Game, Training, and 9-Ball. Pocket Game is the arcade game, and the idea there is you get 100 points for sinking every ball, but bonus points for sinking into particular pockets, making special shots after you complete a round, or after the table is cleared, points for how many shots in a row you made, and points for sinking the balls in numerical order. You're given 10 chances to start with. You lose 1 for not sinking a ball on a shot, and you lose 2 for scratching. You can get some of those chances back by shooting into marked pockets, and particularly when you make a shot while you're in the zone. You'll see this sign come up to tell you that you're ready to get in the zone, and then you have to intentionally scratch. In that situation, sometimes the table arranges itself so you can sink a lot of balls in a row, or you can get bonus shots for sinking the last ball. One nice feature of Side Pocket is that you can put some English on the ball. Holding down B will show you what number each ball is, and it will let you adjust where you're striking the cue ball. The practice mode is primarily about learning how to use English. If you go to it, you'll have your choice of examples, and then the computer will show you how it's done, and then you try 3 different times to make special shots. We've got to talk about that shooting because that is where all the problems lie in Side Pocket. First, there's not nearly enough resolution on the table or the balls, and so lining up a shot properly is extremely difficult. You press the D-pad to adjust your aim, and hit the A button to start the meter running, then press A again to strike the ball. Unfortunately, you just can't tell what kind of angle you're going to be striking the other ball at. Yeah, maybe with practice you could learn how to do it, but why would you want to get good at Side Pocket? The other big issue is that the balls feel like they're made out of lead. When balls strike, pretty much all momentum is transferred to them. They tend to just stop dead. They also move slow and stop quickly. The result of this is Side Pocket doesn't even feel remotely like pool. And for a game that's supposed to be playing like pool, that's a problem. One tip I have for this game is that it really doesn't matter what order you strike balls in. It'll automatically aim you toward the lowest number ball, but you don't have to shoot for that one. It's not 9-ball, that's only a 2-player mode. I'm not really sure who Side Pocket is for. If you like pool, you're gonna hate the game.
If you want to play pool and don't have access to a table, it's still so obviously wrong, you're not going to have fun with it. This is one I just don't see anybody wanting to play.
I think 90 episodes into this project, it's pretty clear that the disk system became a bit of a dumping ground for the low-end projects that no one really wanted to take a chance on. Basically, if it wasn't by Nintendo or Konami, then it was very likely to be junk. So it is really strange that Taito released Bubble Bobble on the disk system. This was their biggest smash hit arcade game of 1986. A game that already had gained universal acclaim, and they put it on the disk system rather than use a cartridge. Of course, it could have been a bad port. I mean, some of the staff who worked on this version of Bubble Bobble were new hires for Taito, coming over from the team that made Super Monkey Daiboken. But the port was just about perfect. It's hard to imagine that it could have turned out any better. Bubble Bobble is all about Bub and Bob. Just two normal guys who were hanging out until a wizard came along and stole their girlfriends. The wizard also turned them into dinosaurs that happened to have very convenient abilities that would let them defeat all of the wizard's minions. It's weird how often evil wizards will turn somebody into a creature that has some kind of power that will let them beat the wizard. As you're playing, he jumps and B spits out a bubble. Your goal on every stage except for the very final one is to trap all of the enemies in bubbles, and then pop the bubble. You can pop bubbles by jumping into them, running them into walls. Just don't let the enemy break free on their own, otherwise they'll get angry and speed up. When you pop a bubble that contains an enemy, it turns into some kind of collectible item. Usually a fruit or vegetable, but sometimes you'll get something else. And you collect these for points. After you defeat the final enemy on a stage, you're given a few seconds to collect whatever items have fallen, and then you're sucked up to the next level. Getting around on stages can be a bit non-intuitive at first glance, though it doesn't take too long to get the feel for it. You can jump up through any surface, and if there's an open area above it, then you can land on that floor. If you fall off the bottom of the screen, then you wind up at the top, and that is true for enemies as well as yourself. You can hop off your own bubbles and use those to get to a higher point, but the timing for that is really tricky. In fact, I'd consider that to be the worst aspect of the game. There are a lot of stages that require that you use your own bubbles to hop out of certain holes, and the way that the bubbles interact with the stages makes it super difficult to do this repeatedly, which is what you'll inevitably have to do. You'll miss that perfect jump, and then all of the bubbles that are touching the one that you contacted pop, and then you're back at the bottom. Another complication with the bubbles is that these stages have a certain airflow to them that guide the bubbles around. So you'll see that bubbles tend to collect in certain areas. That can be helpful when it pulls a bunch of enemies together for you, or it could be sending the bubbles that you need to bounce off of to someplace that you don't want them to be. If you linger too long on a stage, then you're told to hurry, and in this state, all of the enemies speed up, plus an invincible ghost appears to chase you down. If you die, everything goes back to normal, and of course the ghost stops if you manage to defeat all of the remaining enemies. Any contact with an enemy is fatal in Bubble Bobble, and you have 3 lives when you start out. Fortunately, you have as many continues as you need to complete the game. And whenever you get a game over, you can save your progress. Though being able to save doesn't mean it's easy. This is a long game, and a lot of the stages get pretty mean. Besides the bonus points that appear on stages, there are a lot of special items to collect. I mean, a lot. There's roughly 50 things that will appear on stages that have some kind of special effect. That is way too many for me to try to cover here, but to hit a few of the high points, there's 3 kinds of candy that change how your bubbles behave. an item that effectively ends the stage and turns it into a special bonus mode where you're competing with a second player to collect items, bubbles with letters in them, and if you spell the word extend you get an extra life, items that destroy all of the enemies on the screen, and even some level warps. The most ubiquitous special things that will appear are bubbles that spontaneously generate on their own and can be used to attack enemies. You've got water that will flow back and forth until it falls off the stage, lightning that shoots the opposite way that you're facing when you touch the bubble, and fire that drops down and coats the ground below you, possibly bogging you down as well as destroying any enemies. There's over 100 regular stages in the game, and there's only one boss, found at the very end. One cruel aspect of Bubble Bobble is that you can only beat the game if you're playing 2 players. The 2-player mode lets both players go simultaneously, and you can both help and hinder each other. If you don't have a second player out when you defeat the final boss, then you're thrown back about 50 stages. If you manage to defeat the final boss with 2 players, well, then another nasty surprise is waiting for you, because you go on to Super Bubble Bobble, which is just the same stages all over again, except the enemies have changed, and there's different items that appear. If you defeat all of the stages in Super Bubble Bobble, and then beat the final boss with 2 players, then you finally get to see the ending. Of course, the end of the game wasn't the end for Bub and Bob. They essentially became Taito's mascots, turning up in a ton of games. And the Bubble Bobble series itself goes on for a long time. In fact, there's 3 completely different games that all state that they are Bubble Bobble 2. I'm sure this will be a huge shock to you, but Bubble Bobble is a beloved classic in Japan, though more for the arcade version than the FDS one. Remember that the disk system wasn't the most popular of platforms, and that seems to have limited people's exposure to this port. And of course, I think it's a fantastic game. It even has one of the all-time greatest video game melodies. It's hard to find a game this charming, this enjoyable to play, with this much action going on. The variety of stages and items is just absurd, and to cap it all off, the 2-player mode is really great. The only reason not to play Bubble Bobble on the disk system is because you're playing one of the better ports. This really is a masterpiece. I'm going to disappoint you right now. Famicom Grand Prix F1 Race is not a sequel to F1 Race. Okay, that might not have disappointed you, but maybe there is someone out there who's disappointed. F1 Race was one of the first big hits for the Famicom, and one of the earliest games that pushed the technology of the system. In 1984, having a home game system be able to play a behind-the-car view racing game this smoothly was just about miraculous. Well, Famicom Grand Prix F1 Race for the disk system is a top-down racer. A completely different experience from that original F1 race. Famicom Grand Prix F1 Race is the 3rd game in Nintendo's Fax Competition series. When these games were released, you were able to record how you did to the disc, and then take your disc to a store kiosk where the results would be faxed to Nintendo. In this case, the players with the best track times would be able to win a copy of Super Mario Bros. For the Game & Watch. That would be Nintendo's LCD handhelds. The Game & Watches were major successes, of course, in the early 80s, but by the end of 1987 the line was pretty much dead. In fact, this was the only way to get the Japanese version of the Super Mario Bros. Game & Watch. In the US it had a retail release, but in Japan, the 10,000 copies distributed as prizes are the only ones that exist. Of course, to win those prizes, you have to play Famicom Grand Prix F1 Race. And how do you do that? Well, first, you have to buy a car. After you go to Game Start, you get your option of Grand Prix mode or time trial. Time Trial's just a single race, while Grand Prix is more of a career mode. If you select that and pick a new game, then you start out with $500,000. You have to use that money to purchase a car to race with. There are 24 cars to choose from, but the most expensive car that you can afford at the start costs $300,000. The most expensive car that will eventually become available costs $50 million. So if you want the best vehicle, you're going to be grinding for a long time. Cars are rated on 4 different aspects. The engine size, which determines top speed and tells you if they have a turbo boost, fuel efficiency, durability, and tire durability, as well as if they're wet or dry tires. Some of the cars are strictly better than others. You are going to have to pit in the middle of a race, so tire durability isn't as helpful as it might seem, and the same thing goes for the body and fuel efficiency. Top speed is going to be overwhelmingly the deciding factor in how well you place and how much money you're earning toward buying your next car. Once you're done shopping, select Race, and then you have your choice of 4 levels. Here is one place where Famicom Grand Prix F1 Race is like the original F1 race. There are 10 tracks, you play a season of 4 of them, and which level you choose determines which track you start on. So you're going to find a bit of overlap in levels. There's also a placement requirement that goes with the level. For levels 1 and 2, you just have to not be last in order to continue on to the next race. But in levels 3 and 4, you have to place 6th or better. The controls on the track are different from what you might expect. Okay, left and right turn just like in any overhead racer. The difference is in how you accelerate. A is to accelerate in low gear, B is to accelerate in high gear, and pressing up will activate your turbo, assuming your engine has one. You have to press A and B simultaneously if you want to brake. So what this means practically is that you get your car up to speed by pressing and holding down the A button, and then switch over to the B button. The cars you're running at the start have such a low top speed that they get up to the maximum low gear speed in about a second. It really does go by in just a blink of the eye. And of course running in high gear or with the turbo drains your fuel faster, but that didn't really make a difference for me. Races are 4 laps long, and you're almost definitely going to have to pit after the 2nd or 3rd lap. The primary reason for that is the tires. Those wear down constantly as you drive, and a bit faster if you go off the track. When they get down toward the end of the bar, your handling becomes a lot sloppier, and when it's gone, you're basically drifting around every corner. It's actually something that you can get used to and take advantage of, but for any kind of sharp turn, you're probably going to want to have some tires left. When you pit, all 3 of your bars, body, tires, and fuel get refilled, and if you mash the A button while you're in the pit stop, you can pull out a little bit faster. Any collision with another vehicle will spin you out, but it's less of a penalty than it might seem. A wrecked vehicle leaves an oil slick behind, which has the same effect. If you wreck or run out of fuel, then it's game over and you're back to the shop menu. Complete the race and you'll get some prize money based on your position. As you start out, this is going to be a very small amount of money, probably around $50,000. And when you consider that the next tier of vehicles costs $1 million, and you really need to go up 2 tiers before you properly start winning races, this is a game with a long grind. You'll also note at the end of the race that your driver is Mario, as is your pit crew, which I guess means that Famicom Grand Prix F1 Race is the first Mario racing game. I don't think we can stretch it far enough to say that this is the first Mario Kart game, but feel free to use that trivia to win some bar bets. And that's the cycle of the game. If you manage to complete all 4 races in a level, well, good for you, I guess. There's no additional reward there. You just have the grind to get better cars, and then running the same tracks. In the time trial mode, you can have up to 4 players compete for the best time, though every player has to wait their turn. There's 6 courses that are available here, and they're not all of the same courses from the Grand Prix mode. Famicom Grand Prix F1 Race got a sequel. In fact, it was already in development when this game was released. A sequel was released less than 6 months later, which means I'll be getting to it in episode 117. In Japan, Famicom Grand Prix F1 race is pretty well regarded. I found people pointing to it as the best 8-bit racing game, and I seriously disagree there. I wouldn't even call it the best top-down racer in the Famicom family. I like Namco's Family Circuit series a lot better. My issues mainly come down to the control scheme. Having 3 different buttons for accelerators feels very awkward, and I'm really not a fan of this kind of slow grind for cash. Multiple tiers of cars that you have to earn your way up to? Sure. But players aren't really gaining anything when they repeat these same races over and over and over again until they're finally allowed to have a chance of winning. It's not a total stinker of a game, but there's so many better options if you want to race. Last week, as I was recording this, I was in Austria. I was in Salzburg, the city of music, and Vienna, and while there I did plenty of things related to classical music. Like I visited Mozart's apartment. Not worth it, by the way, the museum they have there isn't great. And now, here I am looking at Family Composer, software for the disk system where I can easily butcher all of the world's great music. If Family Composer looks a little familiar to you, that's because it's basically Ikinari Musician 2.0. Ikinari Musician was a cartridge that was released in March of 1987, but this is a case where there are some distinct advantages to doing this on a floppy disk. For one thing, you can easily save your music. You can save up to 6 songs that you've created onto your disk. Composing songs is done through this interface, which is more than a little confusing. The first thing you'll want to do is pick a backing track, and you do that by pressing select when nothing is playing. There's 24 default rhythm tracks, some of which are carried over from Ikinari Musician. But unlike Ikinari Musician, you're not required to use these. After you pick one and go back to the main screen by hitting select again, the white blocks along that left-hand square will list the chords that will be played, and you can freely edit these. You can't alter the percussion, and the timing is always consistent, so some things are in 3/4 time and some are in 4/4, but you do get to pick at least some of the instruments this way, and then you can do what you like. Along the top of the screen are 3 buttons that will turn off aspects of your song. That way you can isolate certain segments if you only want to hear parts of it. Below that you have the recorder and playback functions, things that you obviously need so you can tell what's going on. To the right of that, you'll see a little musical note, and when you select that, you cycle through the default duration for when you're writing your music. And the area below that is for your composition. At the top, you've got the chord for every segment of the measure, and then when you press the A button in the section below it, you'll get a line that indicates the note that you're going to play and the duration. There's actually 16 segments per beat, so you have some pretty fine control. The B button will let you erase a bit of a note. It deletes everything from the position that you've marked at to the end of the note. This way you don't have to constantly go up and change what size note you're working with. You can even extend the note a bit by pointing at that line you've made and then hitting the A button. The interface is a bit clunky, but it's a lot more workable than it was in Ikinari Musician. If you've got some sheet music in front of you, it is reasonably possible to transcribe it here. Your choice of backing track also determines what key you're composing in, but unfortunately you can't do any sharps or flats, which limits your options quite a bit. One feature that you might not expect are the scissors at the bottom. That lets you copy a section of music, not cut. You can highlight a few measures and then drop them back in wherever you like, but it doesn't remove the original ones. Below the sheet music section, you've got a bar that shows how much of the available space you filled with your song. On the right-hand side is a tape deck that shows your position in the song currently, and you can reset it back to 0 here. And below that, you can set the song's tempo. Then you have the instrument options. You've got a handful of pseudo-instruments to choose from. Not as many as you'd think because they're all on the sine wave channel. And you can set the melody for that channel and make it a little bit more shaky if you like. When you're done, hit the stop at the top of the screen, and that will take you back to the title screen where you have the opportunity to save. You can also go to a visualizer, which doesn't actually do a whole lot of visualization. It just gives you a screen where you can play back your music and watch a ship slowly drift by. The Hikari Musician was a cute toy, but you really couldn't do a whole lot with it other than noodle around on the keyboard. Family Composer, on the other hand, gives you an actual interface to work with. If you're patient enough, and are willing to put the time in, you can do a fair amount with it. Now obviously it doesn't replace a real synthesizer, and looking back at it almost 40 years on, there's really no reason to revisit it. Even Hikari Musician has more of a following than Family Composer, probably because this was on the disk system, and more people just had access to the cartridge release. These days, there's a lot better, a lot easier ways to get 8-bit sound. But this is something where I think it's kind of neat that it exists. I also wish that they had taken advantage of the disk system's wavetable channel to use some actual instrument samples, but that might have been a bit out of the system's reach. Family Composer is an interesting, effectively forgotten curiosity. The kind of thing that might have gotten some attention in 1987, and then was completely forgotten shortly thereafter. Unfortunately, it looks like it didn't even get that much attention when it was released.